Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video, I'm continuing my lecture into Introduction to Qualitative Methods Research, and we are beginning section 1.4. I spent the first few sections talking about Derrida's deconstructivism, and then we moved into Spivak in the last section, Spivak's account of marginalization and the process of being marginalized from within the center. What we're going to do in this section is continue that analysis and add a little bit more complexity to the application to qualitative methodologies. So with that, you can access the notes by clicking the link in the description field. Click the link, it'll take you to the PDF. Use the PDF to guide your supplementary research. So let's begin. This is Intro to Qualitative Research. This is section 1.4. And this is going to be sort of an important context. Qualitative analysis and sort of the assessment of responsibility. Discourse contextualized within a qualitative methodology where, for example, participants are socially or self-identified as heroes or heroines, or identify themselves as having a purpose-driven life. And the idea is there are any number of authors that talk about that, right? So Spivak on the idea of responsibility. Joseph Campbell, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. Don Webb is part of a group called the Temple of Set. People label it as a Satanist organization. So, you know, if you're not into that, you might not want to look at Don Webb's link. But just to let you know, Friedrich Nietzsche, Will to Power, Immanuel Kant's second formulation of the categorical imperative, and Lege's translation of the book of Mencius. What we're going to be doing in this section is talking about purpose and talking about responsibility, right? So that part of the qualitative methodology is a recognition. Again, you know, Derrida was more about data interpretation and analysis. The initial discussion that we had in the last section with respect to Spivak pertained to being marginalized within a community, right? You've made it to the center, you've arrived, but nonetheless you're still marginalized because of any number of factors. I didn't use gender and I didn't use race, though that is certainly the case. For me, I used sort of your ideological predispositions, your theoretical stance and such. All of these are instances in which individuals are marginalized. Now what we're doing is we're recognizing that part of qualitative methodologies is about you, the methodologist, about the researcher, him or herself. It's about me, it's about you, it's about us, it's about our people who do social scientific research, and really all of this collapses without social scientific research, right? We need social scientific research in order to propel us forward, but it comes at great sacrifice. It really does come at great sacrifice, and the longer you're in this, the more you'll appreciate the level of sacrifice that's needed. Most people won't really be able to understand the depth of sacrifice that goes into giving to others and to propelling the world in a right direction. But the truth of the matter is, this is good. This is good for you as a researcher, to keep you grounded, to keep you balanced, so that you recognize that, you know, what I'm doing, I'm not just trying to write a dissertation. This is bigger than me just trying to get a journal publication. This is bigger than me trying to turn this into a book. This is about me recognizing my purpose. This is about me assuming responsibility. It's really easy to flee responsibility once it's been gained. But once you've received obligations, you know, duty calls. So that's what this will be about, right? So we're going to be looking at responsibility. Again, I'll read that intro, and then I'll skip past the authors and the links. So, discourse contextualized within a qualitative methodology. For example, participants are socially or self-identified as heroes. Those who identify themselves as heroes or heroines, or identify themselves as having a purpose-driven life. These are the type of individuals. If you're interested in that participant type, then this would be, 1.4 is going to be very important for you. So if you're going to be interviewing, firefighters or police officers, if you're going to be interviewing academics, nurses, doctors, what have you, individuals who sacrifice a lot in order for the greater good, this qualitative methodology would apply to that participant group. So if that's a participant group that you're interested, heroes, heroines, that sort of idea, this section will apply. Also for you, just in terms of self-care and self-reflection, it's the realization that, okay, yeah, it's important to make sure that I recognize the purpose behind the research, and we'll sort of talk about all of this in detail. There's a lot written on it, so let's begin. So, the call to action. The call to action. So, before I sort of explain the diagram, because there's a lot to it, let me go through and read the first half, then we'll revisit the diagram in more detail. And all of this comes from the text, right? So here's the reference, direct quote. Quote, I can formalize responsibility in the following way. This is a direct quote. It is that all action is undertaken in response to a call, or something that seems to us to resemble a call that cannot be grasped as such. I just absolutely love this bit in Spivak. As, there's no surprise, I'm quite a Spivakian fan, and the idea that others won't be able fully to grasp. So if we're the researcher and we're interviewing our participant, and our participant might be identified as hero, heroine, right? We identify, they've done something, right? It was the officers that, rushed in, the firefighters that rushed into the towers as they collapsed, right? It was the person who saved the kid from drowning. It was the person who stopped this bad thing from happening, or what have you, right? You get the idea of a hero, heroine. We don't need to sort of explain that. It doesn't have to be as emblematic as that. But if your participant group, the sample set with which you're drawing your participants from, is identified as heroine, is identified as hero, then this will apply, right? So I can formalize responsibility in the following way. So we're going to try and make sense of what responsibility is. What does it mean to be responsible, right? According to Spivak, obviously, right? So within the context of a call to action, I think this is absolutely genius, and I think it's more apropos than anyone can imagine. It is that all action is undertaken in response to. So we recognize first that action is undertaken in response to. It is the consequence of. It is caused by, so it becomes the consequence. There is an antecedent, right? So it is that all action, right? And Spivak is she's a smart cookie, right? She means this to be universally generalizable. All action is undertaken in response to a call. In response to a call, or something that seems to us to resemble a call, that cannot be grasped as such. And this is what we have. Very simple diagram, nothing complex here. It'll help us understand the diagram I have above. But what's the meaning, right? What's the meaning of this? That all action is undertaken in response to a call. The call might not be grasped as such. The first thing that we have to recognize is that our actions have motivations. The stuff that we do in the world has motivations. Our actions are informed by motives. Our actions are informed by those conditions that led us to act in a certain way. And I've written a book already on intentionality, so I'm not going to formalize this in terms of intentionality, but if you're thinking about the hero, the heroine, if you're thinking about the person who sacrifices for the greater good, and you ask this person, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you sacrificing so much for this invisible community of others? Granted, some people make sacrifices because of transcendental belief and religious belief, and that's fine, but I'm not a theologian, so I can't contextualize this within sacrifice that's intended to, reap transcendental afterlife benefits. It's not to say that they don't exist. They very could well exist, but I'm not a theologian, so we're talking about secularist, physical, material reality, and individuals who are motivated because of, I guess religious belief might be part of most people's motivations, but at least at its base, just a respect and a reverence for humanity. Just a recognition that there is a call. I have a call to act. In terms of the motive, what Spivak is saying is that this call might not be grasped by others, right? That cannot be grasped as such. So what we have is we have an epistemic block. This is actually genius. This is perfect. We have an epistemic block. We, as researchers, have an epistemic block to the real motivations of those who are identified as heroes or heroines or people who make social contributions, activists, what have you. We researchers, have an epistemic block to their motivations. We don't know what their motivations are. We cannot, and if you think about this, this makes sense, right? They could tell you why they're motivated. They could say, oh, I was motivated to rush into a building that was clearly on fire, to run up 50 flights of stairs, knowing that I have a wife back home, knowing that I have kids back home, knowing that I have family members that love me, knowing that the likelihood of me performing this act will probably result in my own death, and yet I did it. And yet I still went into the building. I still went into the flames. I still went, I didn't flee. And you ask that person, imagine that they survived, right? Hypothetically. The person does it, they survive, yay, you're the hero. Irrespective of yay, you're the hero, and I recognize that this might sound like propaganda. You will have to forgive me, but that's just my reference, right? I wanted to make it clear. So you sit across from this person, you ask a firefighter or such, you say, like, okay, I mean, why did you do it? Like, and you say, what do you mean? That's my job. That's what I'm paid to do. No, I know it's your job. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, did you not think about not doing it? There's really no way to explain. It's very, very difficult to explain individual motivations for heroic, self-sacrificing action. It's very difficult. If it's explained, it's usually going to be an appeal to some theological motivation, right? It's help your neighbor, turn the other cheek, sacrifice yourself, The reason why I put Don Webb on the previous page, on page 9, was that there were alternative accounts about this motivation. There are alternative accounts that don't result in self-destruction, that don't result in self-sacrifice. You can make offerings to society without religious belief. You can. You can make obviously we know you can make offerings to society with religious belief, so that's obvious, so I'm not going to say that, right? But in terms of a secularist contribution to the betterment of this thing that we call life, you can make contributions without thinking that you're going to be rewarded in the afterlife, or that you are motivated to do so because some precept told you to do so. You can do it just out of the sheer goodness of your heart. But even if someone were to sit down and ask you, well, why is it that you work so hard, or why is it that you're willing to risk your life, or why is it that you're doing it, there's an epistemic block. No matter what I say, no matter what the individual tells you, we as researchers can never gain access. What does Spivak say? Back to page 10. That cannot be grasped as such. So I'll read it again. I can formalize responsibility in the following way. It is that all action is undertaken in response to a call, but it can't be grasped as such. You don't hear it. When you hear a call in terms of a theological discourse, you feel as though it was the word of God or some deity telling you, do this thing in the world for justice or for good or for the betterment. But I don't want to contextualize it in a theological sense because it wouldn't be fair to the discipline that I'm wedded to. I'm not a theologian. I'm a philosopher. I'm an educator. And the idea is that that call to act allows the individual to assume the responsibility to work. But the idea is once you've made that responsibility yours, once you've signed on the dotted line and crossed the T's and you assume that position, and you recognize from Spivak's last discourse that for people like me, that position is a position marginalized within the center. I've arrived. I'm here. I'm in the university, literally. But despite the fact that I'm arrived, despite the fact that I'm here, despite the fact that there are many people who have, quote-unquote, made it, the idea is, in terms of that action, in terms of that motivation, in terms of that which drives us, the call, that's another degree of marginalization. It's one thing to be marginalized because of your race or your sexuality or your gender. It's another thing to be marginalized by your religious beliefs, lack thereof, ideological predispositions, what have you. It's yet another thing to be marginalized because individuals can't grasp. What did she say? That cannot be grasped. Individuals, no matter how well-intended they are, no matter how much goodwill they have, cannot fully fathom why you do what you do. Well, that makes for great research. That is a condition for just, excellent qualitative analysis, because the idea is we want to try and understand. The point is, as I said in my previous videos, in my own personal research when I was interviewing Holocaust survivors, sometimes you have to recognize that this call, if you will, might be ineffable. It might be just like the phenomenological attempt to describe evil. It's something you just have to be there to understand. You couldn't understand unless you were there. No matter how much you could try to sympathize, it's impossible for you to have an understanding of the motivations, because the source of that motivation would have required that we participate together, that we experience whatever the phenomena was, good or bad. That is the sort of the locus of reference for the motivation. Without cohabitation, without proximity, without a shared experience, it's impossible to understand the motivation for the act. All you can see is the consequence of the action. Wow, this person does a lot. This person sacrifices a lot. This person gives a lot. This person sacrificed his life. Towers collapsed on him or her, and she knew that they had family to go back home to. It's a very difficult thing to try and understand, especially in the West. Why? Because we're an individualistic, I won't say self-centered, but we're an individualistic society where me and I is important. But as I said, and this is what I love about the continuity of these lectures, but as I said earlier with respect to Derrida's sort of critique of Cartesian methodological reduction, methodological skepticism, and Derrida's critique of that, the I in the cogito, I think, therefore I am, is an enormous presupposition, because there is no I without the other. So that the idea is, in terms of the participant's narrative, in terms of what's being disclosed, we have to recognize, and you need to take sort of the pill of humility as a researcher to recognize that no matter how truthful, no matter how transparent, the participant who's identified as someone who self-sacrifices for the greater good, or someone who's a hero or a heroine, no matter how truthful, no matter how transparent they are, we can never gain epistemic access to the motivation for their action. It's not because it's a job. It's not because everybody else is going into the building, and if I didn't go in, I would look like a wimp, or I would... No. Duty calls, action, I go. Why? Because I obligated myself to this. And I mean, this shouldn't be a difficult thing to understand. In terms of education, me personally, those like me, my ilk, those like me, I obligated myself to academia. I joined this thing called the Ivory Tower, and insofar as I joined, I dedicated my life to this work. And irrespective of any attempt for someone to try and understand why, Dr. Campbell, you're doing your videos, why you're putting this stuff up, why, it's not to compare me to like true heroism, right? That would be ridiculous. But I'm just using myself as a reference. It's impossible for me to really explain it. It's impossible for you to understand. So what do we do then? we recognize that when we go to generalize our findings, right? So we're going to generalize. You know, you collect your data, you compile your data, we have our transcriptions, and you're looking in your transcriptions, and this is what I want you to know. Graduate students, please listen to me. I've been where you're going. I've already gone through what you're about to go through. I've been there. So, unlike me, when I was you, I had no one to give me any guidance. So please, trust me on this, because I've been there. When you look in your notes, and you look at the transcriptions of what was said, if you're talking about people who are heroes or heroines, people who self-sacrifice for the greater good, it's a good thing to recognize that it is our inclination, it is part of who we are as human beings, not in terms of human nature, to try and impose meaning. Right? All of these lectures are not discontinued. We're still integrating Derrida with Spivak. We recognize that the event allows for the condition of infinite interpretational capacity, and that the event, since we weren't there, and by there, I don't mean the real specific act of having rushed in the building. No, that was the event. But you do recognize that the act of rushing in the building is a representation of heroism. It's heroism manifest. So that we have, and I hope you're following me, we have the act of heroism, sort of the act, oopsie, we have the act of heroism, or heroinism, and then we also have another event, or series of events. These series of and this is super important, right? I think, you know, I already know that I'm helping a ton of qualitative methodologists because it took me a lot of heartache. I remember specifically trying to make sense of this because I couldn't find it, and it wasn't until well after my dissertation that I realized what I had overlooked. It's not about the act of heroism as it is about the events. It could be multiple or just one, E-V-E-N-T-S, as motive. What we focus on with respect to the hero, and imagine that this is time, this is chronology, right, is the act. You ran in the building. Let's talk about running in the building. Let's talk about that day. Oh, you get the call, okay, the sirens go up, blah, 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 you see it, okay. You sort of go in the mode, oh, let's talk about that. And you would have a qualitative methodology that would talk about that specific event. We recognize that the event via Derrida is going to have multifaceted interpretation, right? So we keep that bit from Derrida. We now recognize with respect to Spivak and responsibility, and that's what this section is on now, that we can take Derrida's discourse on the relationship between meaning, the event, and interpretation, and sorry. Yeah. Do I need to pause this? Okay. 1 second, sorry. So, the important, wait, I have to, sorry. It's a mess. It's not, I'm perfectly capable of setting this right. You know, quick side note. It's important as researchers. Quick side note. It applies, but it's, and I'm going to directly tie it into what I'm about to get to in a bit. It's important that if you're getting into this business, that you're focused. It's important that you recognize your responsibility. That's what this chapter is about. That's what this section is about. It's about your responsibility. And if you accept the obligation, you accept the responsibility. And you need to do that and be very focused because there are infinitely many distractions, graduate students. Infinitely many distractions. There's a TV, there are friends, there are parties, there's after club life, after parties, after parties, there's any bit of slothfulness, lounging, lethargic, you know, there's any number of things that you can do to distract yourself in life. But you need to know, graduate students, that while you are being distracted, there are a handful of people out there who don't do anything else but this. There is no distraction. It becomes time management. I have the time to set, this is part of responsibility. Like that's what this section is on, and I'm about to tie it into all of this. I set aside the time for the family. I set aside time for sleep. I set aside time for sleep. I set aside time for, you know, relaxation and friends and church community and, you know, what have you. Right? There's a time for all of these things. But the idea is, in terms of the world and the progress of the world doesn't progress when we're sleeping. The world doesn't progress when we're at the club. The world doesn't progress when you're playing, you know, Halo, Call of Duty, Skyrim. It doesn't. It stays still for a little bit. So any progress that you see in your life, any progress that you appreciate, any bit of information that you gain that wasn't a consequence of your own effort, someone else sacrificed so that you could get it. Someone else didn't go to the party. Someone else didn't go to the after party. Someone else didn't spend time with their friends or family. It doesn't necessarily mean that they never spend time. It's that they manage their time appropriately. What's important to recognize is the act itself, the manifestation of the heroic act itself is important in terms of qualitative methodology, but it's so obvious. Of course it's obvious. Look what you did. We got it on tape. We watched the video. We heard this. I saw the phenomena. I mean, of course it's obvious to do a phenomenological, narrativized account of the act of heroism. What's important to recognize is that there were or are a series of events or an individual event that could potentially, right, if, you know, and this is a little bit more complex, that could serve as the motivation for that individual. This is why I work as hard as I work. This is why I do what I do. This is why I'm willing to sacrifice my life for others. But even if you were astute enough as a researcher to make the distinction that the heroic act is motivated by events in the past that themselves might not and probably were not instances of heroism, that we gain an understanding of heroism and the heroic act from those instances in our life that might not and probably are not instances of heroism. The question is more about what is that about? What are these events that motivate heroic action about? I want to do a qualitative methodology on that. What could that be? I've identified for you, I've done the hard work for you. I've done the hard work, right? It's now you got the lacuna. Now you got the gap. Give it a name. Give us a description of it. What are those series? And it's multifaceted because it's open to interpretation. We recognize that insofar as we're talking about an event, that it's open to interpretation, and those interpretations are infinite, potentially, right? We're not going to be able to totalize and generalize those interpretations across the spectrum. But there has to be some type of criteria, right? These personality types perform these heroic acts, and this is not a how, but this is definitely a why question. Why? Why? What is it about you? Not your job. I'm not talking about you signing up and being a member of the team and running into the building. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what was it in you as a person. Let me have an understanding of some events that you think might have influenced your inclination to identify this line of work. Why would you put yourself in a position to even be in that consideration, right? That qualitatively rich, potential data could inform our understanding of individual motivation and push us forward one tiny incremental notch. The idea is a recognition, as Spivak says, that irrespective of even their transparency, your participants' willingness and transparency to talk about, let me see if I can get another color. No, I don't have any other colors. I used to have a red one. Willingness and transparency to talk about, right? So researcher is asking the participant, in terms of responsibility and heroism, tell me about the act. So they disclose, this is why I did what I did, this is how I did what I did. Okay, but also tell me about some events in your past that you think might have led you, that might have incentivized you, that might have motivated you to act in this manner. And they disclose that. Even if they're willing to do that, what does Spivak say? It can't be grasped fully. There's still an epistemic block, and it is not up to us to make or to impose an interpretation on the participant. It's not right, it's not ethical, it's not moral in a secular sense, and probably in a religious sense, right? It's not moral for us to try and impose our interpretation on the individual, because it's wrong, because you'll never know, right? And it's not about us trying to make sense of it as much as it is us trying to correlate what they disclosed with what they've done. That's the best that we'll have, right? The disclosure of events in the past that could have served as potential motivators for heroic actions, and actually what was done. The act of self-sacrifice, the act of social contribution, the act of, maybe even personal sacrifice in terms of, losing one's life in a building or what have you. Okay, so the next quote, the call to adventure functions as a passing phenomenon that catches the wandering eye and lures one away from the frequented paths. This is not me, Campbell, this is Joseph Campbell. It's sort of interesting, students always ask me this. They're like, Dr. Campbell, where are you getting all this information from? This isn't really formulaic. The idea is I get this information from reading books, graduate students. You need to read. You need to recognize that our responsibility is always to be in the mode of synthesizing information. It's not about regurgitating information. Oh, here's what Derrida said, or here's what Spivak said, and here's what Joseph Campbell said, and da da da. No, here's what a combination of Spivak, Derrida, and Campbell would sound like. It's this. Take a little bit from Derrida, take a little bit from Spivak, take a little bit from Joseph Campbell, and here's what you have. Right? Here's the discourse on responsibility, and then refer it back to Spivak's discourse on responsibility. So, the call. Now, what's interesting here, and the reason why I put it both in italics, is that you recognize clearly a direct quote about Spivak's work, referencing a call, and not about, this is Spivak's work, this is Spivak herself, the work that I'm citing. Yes, this is Spivak's work on responsibility. So Spivak says, a response to a call, and Joseph Campbell says, the call to adventure. So the idea then is definitely about this call. It's not about the act. The act is a result of what being a hero really is. Being a hero really isn't about the final end state. It's not really, being a hero isn't really about sacrificing your life and losing your life for the benefit of others. I mean, if that's entailed in it, then okay, sure. It's about that thing that drives the person to want to put themselves in that position in the first place. It's about the thing that motivates a person to sacrifice time with others and friendships and family and rest and recreation in order to make social contribution in the first place. Heroism is something more intangible. It's less tangible. It's not as obvious as the act of heroism, because as we've already seen with respect to Spivak, that is itself a consequence of the call. Okay, so now let's look that I've sort of contextualized it. It took a while to contextualize it, but now that I've contextualized it, let's look at the diagram above. So the diagram is going to be a combination of basically everything that I've covered until this point. Campbell doesn't refer to me, it refers to Joseph Campbell. So, we have the call. The call, it posits responsibility. A willingness to accept responsibility. I can't explain how deep this is. I wish I could so that you could understand. But the idea is, if you are going to sign on that dotted line, and you're going to join the team, whatever the team might be. It's academia, it's the police force, it's the firefighters, it's the nursing community, it's the physicians community, it's what have you. People who contribute to society, sort of social contributors. You have to recognize that there is a responsibility, right? You have to be fit in order to serve. You have to be well-intended in order to serve. You have to recognize that insofar as you obligate yourself, you're obligating yourself to a responsibility, and most importantly, that is going to require, now this is more for us and sort of self-care as researchers, that is going to require a certain amount of sacrifice on our part. If we're talking about our participants, it's important to recognize that we ask our participants about their relationship to that sacrifice. Because responsibility entails sacrifice. You cannot have responsibility without having sacrifice, right? In order to assume obligation, in order to be responsible, you have to sacrifice. And there will be varying degrees. Some people will sacrifice everything, and that's fine. Some people will sacrifice lots of things. Some people will sacrifice nothing, but if you sacrifice nothing, you're not going to be the person that anyone's going to be looking toward. No one's going to go to you to invest their money or look for the next best idea because you're not responsible. We had the meeting at 4 o'clock. You never showed up. I asked you to send the email out. You never sent the email out. You were out doing something else. Responsible people have to sacrifice. So that the idea is we recognize now that part of heroism, part of this concept, part of the way in which we should formulate our qualitative questions has to address the notion of sacrifice. And it's not the obvious sacrifice of the event of heroism, to be clear. It's everything that led up to the individual's willingness to join a community of people that would then require more sacrifice. Right? It's that. Okay. So we have the call. The call posits a need for responsibility, and this creates an opportunity. Right? It creates an opportunity to respond. We recognize from Derrida, what we're doing is we're synthesizing Spivak on call, Joseph Campbell on responsibility, Spivak and Joseph Campbell on call, Spivak on responsibility, and Derrida on the opportunity. So this is a synthesis of everybody, right? Just so that you know, because I might be going a little fast, and forgive me, I don't feel like I'm going fast, but sometimes I have to sort of slow down and make sure that we're all on the same page. So a little bit of ghetto philosophy. The idea is, from Derrida, and this was in the previous section, I forget where, just Control F, I use PC, and type in opportunity. So I talked about this previously. The opportunity is a consequence, right? The opportunity is itself a consequence of that sense of destabilization. The deconstructivists, rather than running from instances of discomfort, rather than running from anxiety, rather than running from fear, rather than running from pain, you have to run from pain. So not pain, not something physical like that. It would be ridiculous to subjugate yourself to pain, of any type of pain. But rather than running from those psychologically uncomfortable situations, it's imperative to recognize that those instances of discomfort present an opportunity. It presents an opportunity for the participant, for you, for us as people, to recognize and critically reflect, to deliberate on, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling right now? Why am I discomforted now? To critically assess. And that's a difficult thing to do. Overwhelmingly, people flee that responsibility. And this responsibility now isn't necessarily a responsibility to save other people. It's a responsibility for us to deliberate about ourselves. It's a responsibility for us to critically reflect on ourselves. It's a responsibility for us to recognize that those events and those sequences of events of our past inform how we act in the world, and a responsibility to understand and critically reflect continually to correlate that relationship. That is, the relationship between the events that motivate my heroism, the event that motivates my self-sacrifice, my work ethic, my due diligence, my social contribution, and this sense of discomfort that I have now. If you always sort of numb yourself when you feel that sense of discomfort, if you run away from that sense of discomfort, what you're doing is you're denying yourself an opportunity to reflect. Right? And, you know, it's, some people would rather not reflect. And I recognize there are some instances that are so heinous that they'd rather not reflect. And then you talk to a psychologist. But I think people underestimate how powerful we are to heal ourselves. I think people don't recognize that a lot of heroic action is, in itself, a consequence of this deliberative act. You know, I failed to save that person when I was younger, or I failed to save myself, I failed to stand up for myself, I failed to do this, or I did this well, I saved him, and I remembered the feeling that I got, the surge that I got from having saved, from having protected, from having defended. There's any number of possibilities, but the idea is we as qualitative methodologists have to recognize that the heroic act to talk about the event of that day is so freaking superficial. Leave that, and not in a pejorative sense, but leave that to the journalist. And I'm not disrespecting the journalistic community. It's a different function. That's the function of journalism, right? So they can do better good in terms of making their social contribution, because sort of talking about the events of the day is more about journalism. That's what journalists do. We're not interested in sort of rehashing what happened that day. I put on my suit just like every other day. I went outside just like every other day. I called to action just like every other day. I did what I do. You know, I don't understand why it's... No, not that. That's not what we're interested in. Tell me about you. Tell me about you as a person. Recognizing also that once they, he, she, disclose possibly what the events in their past or in their life might be that have motivated this act, that even then we might not understand. What we can absolutely understand, because theory is as good as it gets, I mean, and I really believe that, what we can understand is that that discomfort presents an opportunity. Responsibility necessitates sacrifice. The level of sacrifice is always discomforting. But that discomfort, independent to the fact that you know that you will be sacrificing, allows us an opportunity for social contribution. And that's key, right? So there's a lot there. Interpret that however you want to interpret it. But the idea is it's not about focusing on the act of heroism. This is everything that precedes the act of heroism, which is what we should be interested in for this particular sort of personality type. All right. So then, in terms of Derrida, we have a concept that I didn't talk about before. It's called setting to work. It's called setting to work. And in terms of this idea of setting to work, this setting to work itself yields the act. So what you can see that I did, and I'll talk about setting to work in a little bit, before I had a call, and then we had the act. Right, so setting to work informs the act. And yeah, setting to work informs the act. So the call posits a responsibility. That responsibility is going to necessitate some level of sacrifice, and that sacrifice, that potential sacrifice, is going to discomfort. Rather than fleeing from the discomfort, this is also, obviously, responsibility assumes that you are in a position to be given a task, right? I need you to do X. Make sure that this is completed in Y, right? You cannot have a responsibility if you cannot be tasked with something, obviously. So imagine that there is that, but you can task yourself as well. What we cannot do, now to really deconstruct this, what we cannot do is presuppose that it was the responsibility of the firefighters, or I'm just using an example because it's clear and it's easy. The firefighters were responsible to save lives, but they also have a responsibility to themselves, right? And if it was completely destitute, the possibility, this is where sort of moral dilemmas come in. So if you're a moral theorist, if you're a PhD philosophy student, and you want to talk about, it's called supererogatory actions. I'm not going to talk about that now. I'm not going to write it on the board, but I try to give examples for qualitative research for everybody. As many people that can come into my head, I try to share it so that you can see that this is applicable. In moral ethical theory, it's called supererogatory action. Supererogatory action is the action where you are potentially tasked with something that might be above and beyond the call of duty, right? So not just the call of duty, but the task, the potential task of being called to act above and beyond the call of duty. In terms of the opportunity, if you're a social theorist and you are doing more organizational conflict or organizational psychology, if you're interested in organizational structures and you're a graduate student that's potentially going to do your research in that field and write your dissertation in that field, opportunity is important here because the business community is built on opportunity. Opportunity is the foundation for all of capital. There is no capital without... There is no capital... You want to really get sort of freaking gangster with this. There is no capital without opportunity. This is the niche, right? It manifests as niche. But there is no niche without responsible folks, right? You got to have people who are willing to work. You need somebody to send out the emails. You need somebody to do the footwork. You need somebody to do your advertisement. And then there are those who want to get stuff done. So the idea is, in terms of opportunity, this opportunity is a consequence of, again, to go back to Derrida and to synthesize Spivak, Derrida, Campbell, Joseph Campbell, that is, and all of this in terms of heroism. You wouldn't think that, well, we could look at organizational structures as being heroic. No, of course, heroism is for people, right? And, heroism is about, rushing in buildings and, diving into traffic to save grandma from the oncoming car. That's what heroism is. It's not about businesses. Well, I deny that, right? Because the structure of the heroic act, the sort of the flow, and I'm not in any sense saying that this is exhaustive, and I didn't make this up. There are references for every single thing that I've put on the board. None of this is me. The idea is that opportunity, and I'm only applying this to business now because I want to be sort of diverse in my examples, and because I think it's most meaningful for business. The whole point of business is recognizing the discomfort of the unknown. I really don't know if this is going to work. I really don't know if I don't feel good about this idea. I don't really want to invest my money in this project, right? No, I don't really want to give this dude a chance. I don't really want to, I don't want to take the risk. Why? Because I don't know. Well, those people, there are times at which that's appropriate, right? But if that's the norm, if no one's going to take the risk, if no one's going to make the investments, then there will never be an opportunity. People take the risk, people make the investments precisely because they have some sense that, you know what, this is a good opportunity. There's a potential niche here that I might be able to sort of capitalize on, and I'm willing to put sort of my money where my mouth is. And you recognize the reward for risk in terms of profit. So in capital, the opportunity is rewarded by profit. But the question is, well, Jason, I see how that makes money. How is that heroic? Well, not to go back to my Walmart example that I did in probably another lecture series, and most of you don't follow everything that I do. I don't think anybody follows it's impossible probably to follow everything that I do because I do so much stuff. But I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about sort of social consciousness, sort of capital with, and Zizek talks about this a little bit. I disagree categorically with Zizek on this point, however. Genius, but we just are going to agree to disagree. I do believe that capital can do good, and that insofar as you invest your dollars into an organization, that you are investing your dollars into social good. I don't believe that this is fake in any sense. I don't believe it's fabricated. I believe there are instances in which it's fake and it's concocted in order to generate ad revenue and in order to generate, if it's a physical business, in order to generate just revenue. But the example is of Walmart. So Walmart recognizes, because of course they hire qualitative researchers. So for those of you who are looking for a job, qualitative researchers, they hire qualitative researchers to go out into the field and ask, into the community, into America, right? The largest employer in America. Go out in America and ask people what they want in terms of food. So they go out, they interview people, what do you want in terms of food? And they bring all that data back. What do people say? They want more organic food. They want food that, they want fruits and vegetables that don't have all of the pesticides, this and that, and are organically raised and, eco-friendly and conscious for sustainability, all of these factors. Now, there might be a little bit of investment, I would imagine. I'm not a CEO, but I would absolutely imagine that in order to transform the operational structure of how you do produce, it's going to require a couple $1 million. right? So you're going to have to put in some, and probably a ton more than that. I have no idea about money. But, so it's going to require some money on our part, the part of Walmart. You know, everybody's so quick always, oh, Walmart's a slave laborer thing, it's the worst place in the world. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I believe that Walmart is a reflection of us, and it's hypocritical for us to blame the organization because they are showing us that they're responding to our needs. Why? Because what do? I buy all my fruits and vegetables from Walmart now. Their fruit selection is amazing. Their grapes are like that big, organic stuff, super fresh, super sweet. They taste different. It tastes different. The food tastes different than even Publix. So the idea is, yeah, it's, you know, Jason, Dr. Campbell, it's a little trite. The example's a little trite, and it might not be as, you know, world-changing as maybe you would like. It's not as obvious as rushing in a building and saving someone before towers collapse. It's not that. But the idea is, you know, there was a recognition that change was needed in order to satisfy a community. Granted, let's keep it real, it was about preserving dollars. But that change required some investment, and that investment, that responsibility, it was discomforting. I can imagine. I'm not sure if this is going to work out. What ended up happening? Everybody won. Walmart makes more money, more profits, and people get a more sustainable means of produce. What does that mean nationally? What does that mean globally if everybody does that? Well, it means that things are a lot better. Right? And I understand that this is an enormously generalized example, but you get the idea, right? I deny the argument that says that it's impossible for capitalist business structures to both maximize profit and maximize social good. I don't see why the two are incompatible. I refuse to believe that the two are incompatible. I believe you can seek to maximize profits while you are contributing to society. Why not? Okay, so if you're a graduate student in that, it's not quite heroism in the traditional sense, but, you know, that's another line of research. In terms of the setting to work without belaboring the point, because I'm already an hour into this and I'm on like a half of page, but the setting to work is the recognition of your obligation and responsibility. It's one thing for someone to task you with something. Okay, so I'm at the university, I signed up for the university gig, my dean tells me, he says, hey Jason, I need you to, you know, publish, he doesn't, and this would never happen, but just as a bad example, you know, we need you to, you know, lead this conference, or we need you to write this article, or what more likely will happen, we need you to travel here and talk to these people because they want to meet you, or blah, 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 you know, I'm sort of introverted. So, you know, you play the game, you do the job, you make the sacrifice. The setting to work is the recognition that I've been tasked. Jason, hey, we need you to go take a trip to West Palm Beach and shake hands with a couple of people. Okay, sure. I know I have to do it. I've been tasked. I've assumed the responsibility. I'm discomforted, but I recognize that discomfort presents an opportunity. It presents an opportunity for philanthropy. It presents an opportunity for me to do what I do best and what I love most, is to make my contribution in terms of genocide awareness, or, you know, virtual education and what have you. So I know that despite the fact that I'm discomforted, I signed up for this job. I've been tasked. Now I got to do it. It's that now I got to do it. That's the setting to work. It's the moment, you know, you see like LeBron James or Michael Jordan. I don't think I've actually seen this footage, but it would be like, you can imagine like Nike would love a footage like this. This footage has to exist. It's like right before the game. Kevin Garnett has it, but he's got a whole bunch of haters and he's got the headphones on and he's like in the bus. Not that vibe. Where you're in the locker room, you can sort of hear the crowd roar in the background. You know it's game time. You know you're going to be called out. Oh, you know what's a good example of this too? Setting to work, even better than the basketball. Setting to work can be completely understood by the walk that boxers take from their locker room to the ring. The distance between the locker room, not the locker room itself, but the distance between the locker room and the ring is setting to work. Setting to work is a recognition that the task is about to be initiated. You're about to do the thing that you've been tasked to do. You're about to, either that you've self-imposed or that others have tasked you to do. You recognize sort of the butterfly feeling, right? You might be a little queasy, you might be unsure, you might, whatever it is, heroic action is sort of rooted in a little bit of fear, a little bit of aversion to the unknown, but you rise to the occasion anyway. And that setting to work it's a sort of a one-track focus. Like, this is what I'm about to complete this act. I'm about to do it now. To try and get an articulation of what that might be like, aside from athletes. You can see it with athletes. You literally see it with athletes. I would love to read a qualitative methodology. I would love to read a qualitative methodology where somebody could articulate. It would be very hard. You'd have to be a really good writer and just thinker to try and articulate that in the business community, in the academic community, for regular people at their regular tasks. Right? I don't know what that would be like. The closest that I've seen to Derrida's setting to work is Heidegger's notion of equipmentality, but I can't get into that now because it's in my aesthetics video series. So if you want to get a sense of that, just type in my aesthetics video series. The PDF will pop up. Link the PDF, Control F, the word instrumentality, and then look at the appropriate sections, and you can get more into it. But I think I've made this clear, right? None of this is overtly heroic. But when you think about each individual part, and I've been sort of deconstructing these parts rather methodically now, I've done half a page in an hour, the idea is, no, I can see how that aspect, I understand the aspect of the call now. It's going to refer back to not the actual act, but those events that motivated the act. And the responsibility, I get a sense of that responsibility. It's going to require sacrifice. That sacrifice is going to discomfort. That sense of discomfort in a deconstructivist model presents precisely the opportunity to meet those obligations, to meet those tasks, to do what you've been told to do or such, or to do the things that you've yourself initiated and so on. And then it's time to prepare. It's the preparation before the actual work begins, and then you do it. This is all of the elements of heroism. This is really what it is. It's not flashy, right? There's nothing amazing about this per se, but this is it sort of deconstructed. Now, granted, this is not Derrida, this is not Spivak, this is me synthesizing all of these authors because they're all talking and using exactly the same language. And the references for their language, I've written it on the page and highlighted direct quotations from two of them, from Spivak and Joseph Campbell, to demonstrate to you that despite the fact that they're not talking to each other, they're using exactly the same language. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and then return with the conceptual in the middle of page 10. Okay, so the conceptual. I'm going to talk initially about three categories, and then I will look in more complexity at what these categories really mean with respect to all of this being contextualized within responsibility. Right? One manifestation of responsibility is heroism, but it's not to say that all of responsibility is manifest within heroism. That's false, right? At stake here is an understanding of responsibility, and the heroic act is one element, right? All heroic acts assume responsibility, but not all instances of responsibility require heroic action, right? So it looks like that. So responsibility to, right? You have a responsibility to, and this means to accord with, right? I have a responsibility to my students, right? I have a responsibility to my students. The responsibility virtually and physically, virtually and residentially. I mean, that is what I wanted to be, and I became that. That is what I worked tirelessly to become, and I am that. And as such, I have a responsibility to you, and you could never, ever, ever, ever understand how seriously I take my responsibility. I take it very seriously. The idea is that responsibility to, and I'll deconstruct what that means later, but I think you get an idea. Then there's a responsibility for, which is different from my responsibility to. So my responsibility for is on behalf of, as a representative, if you will, of, as the mouthpiece for. I have a responsibility for my children, right? I have a responsibility to my children as well. You can have both. But I have a responsibility for my children. How? I have a responsibility for their well-being. I have a responsibility for their nourishment, for their health. I have a responsibility for their intellectual development. I don't have a responsibility to their intellect. I have a responsibility for their intellect. I have a responsibility to cultivate an environment that allows them to do what they do best, which is be nerds, right? That's what we do in my house. I have a responsibility for that. So on behalf of my children, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, right? I have a responsibility to you. So I would say my responsibility, this is actually pretty dope, my responsibility to you requires that I have a responsibility for continual education, for continual self-learning, which is why I'm always reading, I'm always producing videos, I'm always uploading new stuff, I'm always writing, I'm always publishing, because of my responsibility to you. I'm not going to fake it. I'm not going to come up here. And that's the point. And that's the point. Don't assume the responsibilities if you can't recognize the nature of the obligation. Right? If this is about me making money, this is wrong. My intent's wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. If this is, oh, I want to get a whole bunch of YouTube views, I want to be popular and I can be famous, then don't do this. It's not the right motivation. If you want to go into, the police force so that you can get a gun and kill people, that's not the right motivation at the end of the day. That's not what it's for. You would destroy the system if your motivation was retribution and vengeance. Vengeance isn't a source. It would destroy. You have a responsibility to yourself and organizations to understand. I mean, but think about what I'm saying. You can't do that if you're not critically reflecting. You just act on impulse. Oh, this is something I want to do. It's something I can do. I know I can do it because I'm good. So I can do it. So I'm just going to do it because I can. No. You know what? I'm not now at this point as a qualitative methodologist. You might ask yourself in your interview with the participant. I'm not actually at the point where I can understand what you're saying, or I can appreciate fully what you're saying. I want to thank you for what you said. I really appreciate it, but I'm probably not going to include that part in my research. Not because it was bad, not because anything that you said was bad or it was offensive, but because I think that that's something that should be left for you. Or, how many people do that? How many people do that? Oh no, I got the juicy bits now, let's go tell the whole world. Oh no, I got what I needed, let's go. How many people are going to be so critically self-reflective as to recognize that there are instances in which, and oh, I erased it, I felt like it was right there. Oh my goodness. Remember when I had, between call and responsibility, generalizability, I had you probably have it in your notes, right? So I said generalizability, I had it in my head, it was clear as hell. In terms of the ability to generalize, you assume a responsibility as researcher. Don't think that this is just about the participant and the participants asking questions that will elicit discussions and disclosure on responsibility, and asking questions that will elicit disclosure on willingness to sacrifice, and being really savvy at qualitative methodologies and getting data. It's not just that. If that's what you're doing, your heart's not in the right place. You shouldn't be doing this line of work. You really shouldn't. It's not about taking this information and getting a dissertation. I'm not here to teach you to write a dissertation. If you're here because your only motivation is, I want to learn the tools in order to write a dissertation, you're going to be really underserved by my lectures. Because that's not what I'm here doing. What I'm here doing is showing you a way in which we, as researchers, can interact with this community called the social world, this collective group of other people, and serve as a mouthpiece on behalf of them. We speak for the people. We really do. And I don't mean that in any sort of abstract, ethereal, esoteric sense, right? We, researchers, have a responsibility for that narrative. Once it's disclosed, it's not just that this responsibility is unidirectional and we're trying to assess the responsibilities or deconstruct, the theory of heroism and heroic act, and now Dr. Campbell has showed me that it's more than just the act, and here are all the preconditions that went to it, and I understand the systems, and everything's in a nice tidy order, and I'm going to construct questions that will elicit each aspect of these, and then I will have that data and I'll publish a dissertation. No, because you're the worst person for the job. You're precisely the person I don't want to hire. Right? You're precisely the guy I don't want to work with, or the girl I don't want to work with. You're the graduate student that I don't want as my own graduate student. I don't want you as my student. You're not cut out for this, because you're not getting the big picture. Once we have that, we are caretakers of their story. And what we are then obligated to do is we assume the responsibility. Right? So that responsibility for is big. It's big. It's really big. So the setting to work, I'm not going to even try and pronounce the French. AKA, as I said, which is amazing. I completely didn't, it's the task. It's the task. The heroes, this is a direct quote from Campbell now, right? The hero's task is to return to us, society, transfigured, and teach the lessons he or she has learned of life renewed. That's so good. I gotta read that again. The hero's task is to return to us, transfigured, and teach the lessons he or she has learned of life renewed. The heroic act is important, but the transformation of the individual into the type that would be willing to sacrifice is more important. How did you become that type? Now, I'm going to say something that's probably going to discomfort a lot of you, right? But I'm doing a global lecture, so this is for a global audience. I recognize that martyrdom. I did a lecture on, just briefly, on comparing John Stuart Mills's a concept of martyrdom and self-sacrifice, and John Stuart Mills in relationship to sort of the act, contemporary account, what we sort of understand colloquially as the function of martyrdom. And we, in the West, view the act of literal self-sacrifice in and on behalf of the nation, in terms of fighting an aggressor. In the West, this is something we've always had a problem with. Suicide bombers in the Middle East, kamikaze jet fighters in Japan, we've always had a problem with these types of personalities, these types of people. And what we do far too frequently is demonize this community. Just like people would demonize the Nazis, and justifiably so, demonize the Nazis, there's enough literature, there's enough psychosocial theory out there to show and to, I believe, prove that the demonization of that other is not helping us in any way. Us now being the West, maybe even more specifically the United States of America. It's better to understand how that act of sacrifice might also be interpreted as an act of heroism. For us, it's the opposite of heroism. It's the complete antithesis of heroism. The hero responds to that act. The hero saves people who have been affected by that terror act. But is it to say that individuals who commit that act do not see themselves as heroes? Do not identify what they've done as heroic? If you followed and agreed with everything that I've said up until now, and you've watched the Derrida video series, and you remember my reference to Nietzsche, and you look in your notes, and you see where I talked about binary oppositions, and we correlated Nietzsche with Derrida. We talked about binary oppositions and the collapse of polemics, the recognition that it's more... Why would you then believe that there is a side that heroism picks? Heroism is only reserved and exclusively reserved for the good guys and not the bad guys. The bad guys believe they're being heroic too. The bad guys don't believe they're bad guys. They believe they're good guys. We believe we're heroic. We believe what we do is right. The bad guys look at our actions as being tragic and their response to our act as heroic. Who's right? Don't play that game of who's right. It doesn't matter. You spend all day, no, he's right. This is like the phone call, the teenagers being ridiculous, like, no, you hang up the phone with me, you hang up the phone with me. The idea of trying to deconstruct that is a waste of time. That's cyclical, it's going nowhere. It's better to understand how possibly could someone view something that happened in like Boston bombing as being an act of heroism. How could you possibly conceptualize that? What's the justification that you used in order... And I think that dude's alive. Oh, I'm so sorry. But anyway, I think that guy's alive. Right? So the idea is, you know, what were you thinking? Like, how is that a heroic act? And I don't believe that it is a heroic act. As a citizen, as a private person, as an academic, I'm smart enough to recognize that, no, the act, this is a very contentious statement, but the act has a motivation that predates that act. And that part of that motivation was a call to do that act. And that there was some reluctance, there was some unwillingness, but it was performed nonetheless. And you're not one of those people who talked about it, you actually did it. You must have thought that there was some community in the world that would have believed your act was heroic. Explain to me why, how. I want to know more because I don't understand that. And that's an enormous other application. I don't know how many applications I've given you now. I've given you business, community stuff. I've given you philosophy and superobligatory action. I've given you sort of, you know, national security applications of this. None of this is traditional. None of this is sort of cookie cutter applications to the concept of heroism and responsibility. All of it directly applies. Why? You have to be able to understand the theoretical underpinning. Once you understand the template, you can recognize how so much of our social reality is built on these invisible structures of truth with a small t. You know, truth is always negotiable, destabilization of truth is the best thing that you can do, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I think that should be crystal clear. So in terms of practical stuff, room to debate for assessments. So I want to sort of explain this, right? A responsibility to self. There is going to be room to debate this. I'm not saying that, obviously I'm not saying, especially within the context of this, that in terms of your qualitative approach to yourself, to how you interpret the data from your participants, how you interpret the relationship that you have with community, with individuals, with business, organizations, I'm not here saying that there is any right way to make sense of this, but nonetheless we begin with a responsibility to self. Right. So in terms of responsibilities then, there's a typology. I don't assume that this typology is exhaustive, but this is the typology that you will be presented with. So responsibility to self. Internalized, self-reflective self-knowledge. If you do this well, there's relative independence. I would say, from my own personal experience, that there's tremendous independence. I'm not the wealthiest man in the world. And I'm not discouraged by that. Some people are disheartened and discouraged by the fact that, you know, my bank account doesn't have 6 zeros behind the 1. I'm not discouraged by that in any sense. Money's important. I have an appreciation for money, but I look at money more as, personally, as a reward. It's sort of an additional. It legitimizes things to a certain extent, and it's a good way to add value and to legitimize things. But it's not to say that you cannot have value and cannot be legitimized without money. In terms of relative independence, the one thing I can promise you with academia, I can absolutely promise you, is if you work hard and you become the best, or within the group of the best, and you put yourself on the market, and you get multiple offers, and you realize that, no, you really are good, because it's not, you know, people are coming to me, I'm not going to people. And you get the job, and you get here, and now you have done everything that you set out to do. You live a very independent life. Scary independent life. It's impossible for people who are not academics to even understand what I'm talking about. Because the only motivation is self-motivation. And now granted, it can be guided towards doing good for others. And I don't mean that family doesn't play into it, but it's the motivation that derives. Do you think I have to be here? Do you think I'm here because I have to be here now? Do you think I'm here because I couldn't be sleeping or playing games or, you know, well, I guess I could be sleeping. I probably should be sleeping if I could. But, you know, I'm here. Why? Because I have an obligation. Insofar as I've assumed that obligation and I've assumed that responsibility, the payoff for me, rather than being capital, rather than being bank account, is time. I have time. I don't have pressures at all that are not self-imposed. To be honest with you, it'd probably be better for my health to work a regular 9 to 5 because I would probably only work 8 hours a day. But since I don't have time, I work 24/7. But I love it and I'm happy. I really am. People might not believe that, but I'm elated. The idea is the independence isn't just economic independence. Economic independence is one aspect of dependence. This is why I say it's relative. Economic independence is one aspect of independence. What people need to recognize is that there is a temporal independence. I am independent from other people obligating my time. I'm not knocking people because I understand, but I'm going to keep it real. I'm going to keep it 300. I don't have to ask if I can take a 15-minute break. I just stop this video, go off for 2 hours, look at the world, come back when I want. I don't have people telling me how to organize my time, what to do. I can do it on my own. There are pros and cons to that. There are huge pros and cons to that. As I'm getting older and wiser, I recognize that, you know, if you're a manic personality, you will do this a lot. Right? A 9 to 5 structures your life in a sense. But I feel free. I feel liberated. So that responsibility myself, what people can't understand unless you do this line of work, and they're, relatively speaking, they're far, far less people that make it to this point, which is not to toot my own horn, but there are very few people, in terms of socially, that make it to this point in life, to my position. But for those who have, you know what I mean, right? So this is not for the graduate students. This is more for sort of professors and stuff. I'll come back to the graduate students in a second. For professors, you know what it's like. You know what it's like. I mean, this is provided you didn't go admin. If you go to admin, then your time becomes more structured. If you're just faculty, I mean, it's on us to determine what we do with our time, and you could end up wasting your life away not doing anything and not having any obligations to your time, and I just can't live like that. I can't both not assume a responsibility and not do anything with my time. Then that's a complete wasted existence. And those aspects of the institution that preserve and fortify that, that's the point, that's the stuff that I want to destroy. Graduate students, in terms of your research and your relationship with your participants, it's important to ask them if you've already pre-selected your community to be those who self-sacrifice, or those who make social contributions, or those who are identified as heroes, to ask them about tell me a little bit about your responsibility yourself. Like, what do you do for yourself? It seems totally tangential, but you know what end up happening is you're going to have data sets. You can have multiple individuals. You can have multiple life experiences, different genders, different sexualities, different races, different degrees of education, all who have performed or participated in the same phenomenological act. It would be very interesting to see the pattern analysis on the response to this question. Tell me about your responsibility yourself. How does it manifest, right? For me, time management is key, but that's a side note. Self-sufficiency, right? Work and a work ethic, right? These are the benefits of that responsibility to self. So if you look at the individual's responsibility for self, tell me good instances of, you know, the responsibility to yourself. How do you go about what, you know, they might not understand the question, so you explain it a little bit so that the participant gets it. You get the good stuff. Then ask them about the bad. What are the consequences that could potentially be bad? The bad side is world denying. It's all me. It's not about them. It's all me. Nietzsche talks about this, right, a lot. The responsibility yourself can not just introversion, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think people are scared of introverts, and there's nothing to be scared of. But in terms of world deniers, that's the real demon, right? People who it's only ever about me and everything else is the problem. That could be problematic. That interpretation is problematic, but you won't be interviewing these types of people, obviously. If you're interested in this type of research, this is more in line with sort of the psychopath, right? Psychopathy, right? It's all about me It's all about control. Most graduate students won't be able to do this because you would have to, well, I don't know, I guess clinical psychology, definitely psychiatry students might get this, so I guess this would apply to qualitative methodology, so I will disclose this. And in terms of, one thing that's interesting to note about psychopathy, the idea of control, especially if you're talking about sort of ritualized serial killing and such. You think about Dahmer, you think about that type of sort of bizarre personality, deadly personality type. Not your regular sort of guy in the street shooting people, but that type. There's a sense in which, and the movie Cell, with Jennifer Lopez captures this perfectly, in which the idea of, and I have a friend who gave me the term, the concept of materiality of the other. She's a freaking genius. Shout out to her. There's a sense in which that has to be controlled, right? That can be, Dahmer didn't want his victims to leave. He recognized that as long as they were alive, they had volition and they could leave. Not only did he kill them, but he stayed with them while they were dead. And he, you know, he performed sexual acts with the corpses. I mean, it was horrific crap. That is all about me. You're an action figure in my toolkit of action figures. You're nothing. It's me. You can see, I mean, think about how perversely antithetical that is. Same concept. Responsibility to myself. But if I recognize that I really means we, that there really is no I, then I might become the hero, I might be the professor, I might be the surgeon, the doctor, the nurse, the person who tries to help. The flip side to exactly that same coin, responsibility to myself, is, no, it's just my self-indulgence, it's just me, I, my desires, my cravings, my yearnings, my lust, my drive, me. You don't want to be around that type of person. That's a very, very deadly person. That's a very deadly person, right? But that's the flip side. So criminal justice could tie into that. Psychology, psychiatry could tie into that. Lots and lots of diverse application. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause before I go to page 11. This is a perfect moment to pause, make sure my batteries are right, do some sort of technical checks, and then come back. Okay, so the top of page 11, this is number 3. And here's a reference. The call to action, this is from Campbell, the call to adventure, rather. The call to adventure is a high historical undertaking, or religious illumination. It marks, the call, marks the awakening of the self. It rings up the curtain, a rite, or moment of spiritual passage, which when complete, when the act is complete, amounts to a dying and a birth. It's so deconstructivist right there, right? A dying and a birth. Death and birth as a unit. A dying and a birth. And I'll explain that in a second. The old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. The time for the passing of a threshold has come. Okay, so this threshold, it is the death of the old ideas and ideals, and the birth of new ideas. And the consequence in which this unfolds, this threshold, the consequence in which this transformation unfolds is the adventure. It's the act. It's the adventure. What ends up happening is that this becomes sort of corrupted easily by sort of, and I don't want to disrespect people's, this wouldn't be religious, but more spiritual beliefs, but sort of that folk, new age, cultish, sort of that whole cult environment, that new age environment is built on nothing else but this. It's formalized within a responsibility to self. So if you're doing, if you're a sociology student and you're interested, and I was at the time interested in sort of the social constructs and the psychology, if you will, of cults and individuals who were predisposed to cult affiliation. The cult assumes this structure. The cult creates an adventure. It creates a task. it creates a series of obstacles, mental and physical, with which the initiate, having participated in this adventure, recognizes that the adventure really is a rite. Right? It's a rite of passage. And that once you complete your adventure, once you go through this rite of passage, once you've done the last blah blah blah, completed the last blah blah blah. I saw this thing on TV the other day. Guy, sort of new age stuff, has people hoarded in a sweat tent because you had to go through the sweat tent to purge the impurities when, you know, sort of like, you know, biology and regular biologists would tell you, like, what do you mean by impurities? Like, impurities in terms of like sodium, too much sodium in your body, or impurities in terms of like toxins, nicotine maybe? What do you mean by impurities? No, impurities like bad vibes and bad karma. I'm not trying to be mean here, but what's the correlation between sweating and secreting tons of sodium, which you need and will die if you don't have in your body, and bad energy? Well, the New Age movement made that association, and what ends up happening is people die. People die. People always die. Why do people die? Because they buy into that, right? They buy into the fact that in order for me to go and become this new thing, in order for me to be transformed into something better, I have to be forged in flame. Right? I've read this. Right, myself, with my own eyes. I've read this almost verbatim. The idea is, yes, okay, I can see how stress, I can see how pressure, I can see how disruption could make individuals stronger. But the idea is the cult incentivizes this real self-denial as guised by self-affirmation. It's really a responsibility to the cult. It's really a responsibility to the organization, to the group, with a deferred and rejected responsibility to self, but it's cloaked in. It's guised under the tapestry of a responsibility to yourself. The idea is, if you have a responsibility to yourself, we couldn't be in a cult. Don't you see that that's logically contradictory? If I'm going to have a responsibility to myself, then I'm going to assume different functions than you're going to assume, so it wouldn't make sense for us to be in a group because I really am responsible to myself. Right? It becomes problematic, and as I said, one of the reasons why I put the links that I did on the first section of this is that you might not be able to go to the traditional sort of route, right? You might not be able to hear of a responsibility to self from, you know, from the traditional religious canon. So you might gravitate towards New Age stuff, but if you gravitate towards New Age stuff, you could end up dying. So the reason why I linked Don Webb was that there are a group of people that believe that you have a responsibility to yourself, and that it's a good thing, and that the way in which you satisfy that responsibility is going to be contingent on how you as an individual do it. Right? There isn't a formulaic process. Granted, there are some aspects of this that are still powerfully hokey, but the idea is at least there's a community out there, and you can look and do the research and figure out what all that is for yourself. But the idea is, at the end of the day, in terms of qualitative methodologies, that responsibility has to be articulated by your participant. So you have to come up with a method for getting the participants to describe that responsibility. How did you do it? How do you do it? Where do you get the comfort? Where do you get the determination? What are you pulling from? What are your beliefs? What are your sources of ... Without being too invasive, right? It's important that we recognize that. Why? Because the individual, first of all, the individual should have seen themselves as transforming. This is the old me, this is the new me, not the old me, right? I've transformed who I was as a person. I used to be like this, I'm now more like this. I used to do that, I'm more like this. That might factor in, tangentially or otherwise, into how they're able to do what they do, right? The whole reason that you've selected them as a participant is because you've identified them as a hero, a heroine, or an individual socially minded, sacrificing self in any level of sort of qualification for society. So that responsibility to yourself, that responsibility to my education, to my understanding, to my health, my mental fitness, my physical fitness and stuff is important. Responsibility for self, to and for. I don't want to split hairs here so that you can conflate this. There's no absolute proper way to sort of define this. But a responsibility for self, self-preservation, self-reliance, well-being, the pursuit for excellence and stuff. I have a responsibility for myself. I have a responsibility for my health. I wouldn't have a responsibility to my health. I have a responsibility for my health, right? So the well-being and such. Balance, power, will, if it's done well. In terms of cons, I'm throwing this out there so that you can use these concepts to jog your mind. I don't mean these to be totalizing. We're still within a deconstructivist approach, because Derrida informs a lot of Spivak, though she is her own theorist, and though she might shun the deconstructivist label, a lot of what she does is deconstructivist. So if you're a bit confused here, don't feel that it's wrong. All you're sensing is an opportunity now to interpret this however you want to interpret it. And it's okay. It's not a problem, right? That's the whole thing that I've been lecturing on. Get comfortable with the fact that I'm a bit uncomfortable now with what Dr. Campbell's saying. It seems a little bit ambiguous. Responsibility to, for, self, da-da-da. However you want to interpret it, fine. Use that interpretation. Justify it with some reference to the text, with some reference to some reading, and try and formulate your qualitative questions for your participants based on this vibe. Try and identify your research paradigm based on this vibe. Try and make distinctions between responsibility to and for self versus responsibility to and for others. Collapse and consolidate these ideas. Work with it as you see fit. So it can be destructive, it can be totalitarian, it can be self-indulgent, it can be sadistic. Here's a direct quote, right? This comes from Webb. You need to draw to yourself the forces and substances you need to further become. Now that's not to say that it's part of the con. It's another bullet point, so it's another concept. But the idea is you need to draw to yourself the forces and substances you need to further become. Now granted, the disclaimer is that Don Webb is affiliated with an organization, the Temple of Set. The Temple of Set is, I guess, self-identified as a Satanist organization, so you might not want to agree with this. But to be honest with you, irrespective of what Don Webb wrote, or irrespective of his affiliation with the Temple of Set, the idea is, the truth of this is 100% platonic. There's nothing new here. Not to disparage Webb, but as a fact. The idea is, being in the world is a consequence of what? It's a consequence of those things that I allow to influence and affect me. Sometimes you need to expose yourself to uncomfortable things so that you can present lectures like this, so that you can present yourself as a force for transformation, as a force for good. Right? The idea isn't so much that individuals regurgitate information. I think too much social science is that. It's too much parroting journalism. And it's not even doing the journalism well. Real good social scientific research is situated in objective phenomena and objective criteria. It establishes itself as a discipline because it talks about our feelings, our experiences, our mode of being in the world with others and with self. But I think what people forget are the motivations that individuals have. All we ever end up doing is talking about the objectifiable, quantifiable instances that are verifiably, empirically, provable. We don't talk about why an individual was motivated to do what he did, how an individual puts himself or herself in the mental space, whatever that might mean, so that he can perform a task that might seem to be a supererogatory act. How did you do it? How did you overcome? Right? These things are referencing concepts, sentiments, feelings, beliefs, all of which are intangible, none of which can be quantified, none of which need necessarily to be spiritual, mystical, or transcendental. It can be very ordinary and boring. But the idea is qualitative methodology should be concerned with seeking answers to those questions. So, the reference for the con now, the figure of the tyrant monster is the hoarder of general benefits. So you can take what Webb said, which is good, and pervert it. Webb says, you need to draw to yourself the forces and substances you need for further becoming. In order to become, so like it's a really non-spiritual, non-mystical application, in order to become a PhD, you need to sit down in a library and be quiet for a couple hours. Read these books, write these papers. You need to attract and pull to yourself those tools that will help you become a PhD. Part of that toolkit is silence. Part of that toolkit is sleep. Part of that toolkit is dedication and willingness to read. That will help you become. Now, that pulling towards self could, if perverted, hoard and transform the nature of your becoming. So, and I know that this might sound sort of way out there, and I know it does. I'm listening to myself, I'm like, this does sound a little trippy, but, you know, it's part of the notes, it's part of, you know, the lecture on responsibility, so yeah, this is where it's going. So number 4, the figure of the tyrant monster is the hoarder of the general benefits. He is the monster avid for greedy rights of my and mine. This is mine. This is mine. This is my. The idea is I got all of the, now I'm going to use a very sort of pedestrian example. I went and I did all the reading. And trust me when I say I read like ravagely, I ravage text, completely destroy text, ingest everything, sort of I like a sort of eating metaphor, right? You sort of you destroy it, you consume it, you digest it, you become it. In terms of my own growth, I could have, you know, I got the job before I even graduated. I got multiple offers before I even graduated. Not a bragging, none of that, just as a fact. It's a fact of my life. Very good institutions. Good benefits, good salary, good everything. Okay, great. I have all this knowledge. I've arrived, and I could have kept that to myself. I could have hoarded all that I knew. I had already read Freire. I had already read Habermas. I had already read Kant. I had already read Nietzsche. But instead of hoarding it to myself and using my intellectual advantages, my understanding of philosophy, to belittle, to denounce, to refute, to abuse and destroy others intellectually, what do? Just do the opposite. You sort of regurgitate it, right? You regurgitate it. It's a very gross sort of Nat Geo example, and allow the next generation to feed, right? There comes a point at which, though, you won't want to feed on this anymore. There actually won't be a point, because I'm always vomiting up some new interpretive account. The idea is to, you know what the idea is? The idea is to promote the scene in Family Guy where Brian, R.I.P. Brian, where Brian and Stewie and everybody just has like a vomit off in the. What's coming out is the nourishment that we've eaten, which is education, which is theory, which is concepts. We've digested it, we've made sense of it, and insofar as we've digested it, when we spew it back, when I give it, when I transmit it, it's not the same thing that it was when I ingested it. It's part of that, but it has, you know, sort of, this is graphic, but it's like the bottle's on it. Like part of me is in it now. This metaphor is pretty vulgar. But you get the idea, right? The idea is it's infused. The text is infused. The interpretation is infused with me now. It's impossible for you to pick out the pieces that don't have me on it. But the idea is as soon as you ingest it, as soon as you read, assuming that I always say, use this as a supplement to your reading. Use my stuff as a supplement, in addition to your reading. Why? Because if you do that, then you are already in a better position than I'm in. Because you have my interpretation, you have the author's interpretation, and now you have your own interpretation. Can you imagine if you were to take that information and spit it back out? Oh my goodness. That's something new. And this is the proof of the potential infinity of interpretational responses. Right? It's not up to us to define for our participants how he or she interprets his or her act of heroism. It's not up to us to make that interpretation. Our participants might not even be able to articulate it. Why do you work so hard? Why do you sacrifice so much? Why have you given so much? You're not getting anything out of it per se. It's not up to us to try and understand the motives other than what they are capable of disclosing. And you, as a researcher, have to be comfortable with that. To try and impose an interpretation and draw lines that aren't there is to do a disservice to the transparency of your participant. It's to do a disservice to the willingness of the participant to participate in this act of disclosure to begin with. Okay, I just want to check my battery really quick just to make sure, because I've been talking for a while. I still got a lot of battery. It's crazy. Sorry. And I'm not going to edit that out. On with the party. These batteries are amazing. So the bad side is, hoarding, information hoarding, and not just information hoarding that you're not sharing. It's not that it necessarily needs to be shared, but you need to, Derrida talks about this. He has, I don't know if he calls it an ideology of shit or an ontology of shit, but Zizek has a series of videos where he talks about shit. The German shit this way, and their toilets are like this, and the English shit this way, and their shit looks like this, and you would think it's gross, but the older I get is the more I recognize that this typology of thinker, myself included, you move away from the symbolic more to the real, and you end up talking a lot about shit and vomit and, bile, because it's what's real, and it makes sense of things that would otherwise just be, inconceivable. Inconceivable! I don't think it means what you think it means, right? Not pure, true inconceivability, right? Because obviously that's not possible, but the things that we call inconceivable. The idea is we have to recognize that individuals will assume energy, power, not in a spiritual sense necessarily, also not to exclude that, but they will be motivated by things that we might not see as potential motivating factors for acts of heroism. So they might listen to music, they might read books, they might go for a walk in a park, they might do any number of things that facilitate their social function. And the question is not to talk about the instance of social functioning, but everything that led up to the instance of social functioning, so that you would imagine the novel, if this were, or the movie, if it were a novel, this is how the novel would end. If it were a movie, this is how the movie would end. It would be everything that led up. And it's not just a sequence of, this is what I did today. It would have to be a lot of internal dialogue where the person rushes into the building and the movie's done. Everything that led up from their childhood until that moment to the person rushing into the building to save somebody else's life. That's the stuff that's important. It's not just the rushing into the building to save someone else's life, right? Because we recognize that that act is going to be seen by another community as undermining what they presume to be the real heroic act. There's going to be a lot of contentious debate on that. What cannot be debated is the criteria that informed the personal lived experience and the individual, such that the individual was willing to do that. That's what we need to get at, right? Because that cannot be denied, because it was unique to the individual. Okay, so qualitative application, bottom of page 11 here. For example, the idea of being a well-rounded person, mentally, spiritually, physically, balanced, requires time management. It requires time management skills, etc. Understanding the various ways in which people accomplish this balance would be a good qualitative analysis. Trust me, I want to read that as soon as you publish it. we all struggle with things. Time management might be good. It might be better for me to be doing something else with my time than this, but I think I'm sort of temporarily fixed in the future. What I need to do now is what I need to do now, so I do what I need to do now. I've had it tatted on my arm, now or never. Right? So today, not a problem. What might seem to other people as an inability to manage time was roughly planned. There are instances in which you're forced to do stuff, but even if you're forced to do stuff, we need to recognize that time is important. The way in which we utilize our time is essential, because you can't really, your participant can't really give you a good Q&A if they don't have time. So if you're really wanting to do this well, and this being your qualitative research, with the personality type identified as a hero, identified as a heroine, identified as someone who is willing to sacrifice him or herself for the greater social good, give them the questions before they come. The full questions before. Give it to them a week before, not just a day before. And debrief them. Right? The idea is, hey, I'm ABD student XYZ from University XYZ, and I'm interested in this personality type. You meet my criteria. I want to know if I can interview you. Sure, no problem. Blah blah blah. I'm going to ask you a set of questions in our interview, but I want you to have the time to be able to critically reflect on these questions. I'm not going to qualify what the questions might mean, because if I do that, it imposes an interpretation on you. So whatever you think this question means is fine. I just want you to think about these. Don't write down your answers. I'm not asking you to type up anything. I just want you to take the time to review the questions prior to our meeting. Is that something you think you could do? Yeah. Do you think you can devote like an hour, maybe, or more? Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, that's all you need to do. Then you've done this well. Why? Because when they come to you and you're asking them questions, they should not have the questions in their hand while you're asking them questions, is that they're going to refer to the time in which they reserved time to deliberate this before. You're going to get a much richer answer than, hey, okay, so tell me about your childhood and how you ended up saving that woman in the building. Oh, wow, that was great. Okay, so tell me, what about you in the past led you wanted to become in that field? Wow, that's cool. And your research is going to suck. Don't do that. Just give them time. Give them time to deliberate. The interview isn't enough time. Not for this personality type, right? This personality type might require substantial time, right? Give them an opportunity to reflect. Give them an opportunity to deliberate, so that when you meet with them and you begin and initiate your qualitative interview, they've already had time to deliberate, and you're going to get powerful response, right? They might have even had conversations with others about the questions and the ways in which questions were interpreted. And what you're probably going to end up finding is that what you thought the question meant is not how they answered the question, because they interpreted the meaning of the question itself as something different, right? So that the idea is, it's important to recognize that we are always, whether we want to or not, imposing our interpretation on the world. And we have to train ourselves to stop doing that. You didn't see what was, you saw what you wanted to see. And everything that you saw was contextualized in your beliefs, and you acted according to what you believed, what you had faith in, what you hoped for, not what you saw. And that's a problem. You want to forego that problem with your participant because you don't know your participant. This might be the only time you ever meet them. This might be the only time you ever see them. So the idea is, all I'm ever going to have access to is what they tell me. And if it's like historically verifiable instance of heroism, what I know they did. But aside from what I know they did and what they've told me, nothing else is important. Nothing else matters. Why? Because if any attention is focused on that, you're imposing what you believe to be the case on the life of another person. And that's just wrong. That's just profoundly wrong. Okay. So, number Page 12, a responsibility to others. So again, 2, 4, feel free to conflate them, right? This is a deconstructivist approach. It really is a deconstructivist approach. So is 2 clearly defined? Is 4 clearly defined? Could I take elements from 2 and put it in 4? Could I take elements from 4 and put it in 2? Yeah, you could. I've chosen to put some elements in 2, and you could equally feel free to take them out of 2 and put them in 4. There's nothing wrong with that. The idea is just that the demarcation was made. Insofar as the demarcation was made, don't get upset, and don't obsess about the distinction between 2 and 4 in this regard. As much as it is important for you to recognize, okay, first I was talking about self, now I'm talking about other. You could just say, consolidate the last 2 sections into responsibility for self, and we can consolidate these next 2 sections into responsibility for other. Okay, so the benefit of a responsibility to other and not self is that it's quote-unquote altruistic, right? An altruistic action is obviously socially favorable, but you might lose yourself in the process, right? So responsibility to self, oopsie, responsibility to other, and then we'll move on from there. And then obviously we're going to do this. Okay, so responsibility to self, we just did 2 of those. Responsibility to other. This is education, right? Obviously. Not to say that education can't both, I'll talk about this in a little bit in the last page of this section, but not to say that education can't be altruistic. It can. And I have to remember the amount of time I can actually record. So let me pause here on altruism, because I think I only get 2 hours of actual recording time, irrespective of how amazing this video is, the battery is. I think I only have 2 hours worth of video that I can record at any one time. So let me check to see how much video I have left, and then I'll come back. So we're at the top of page 12, number 6, responsibility to others. I'm going to pause here. Okay, so we're going to continue on the top of page 12, number 6, and we're talking about a responsibility to others. As I said, don't get caught up with the distinction between 2 and 4. I recognize that part of the distinction between 2 and 4 might seem arbitrary. There might be arguments for why this particular aspect should or should not be included in 2 versus should or should not be included in 4. Don't obsess about that. What I want you to recognize is we're talking really about what will be 3 main categories: a responsibility to self, a responsibility to others, a responsibility to both self and others. That's the general structure. Okay, top of page 6. With respect to a responsibility to others, this obviously, a responsibility to others manifests in education, as an example. It's altruistic. It's giving, right, rather than taking. So that the idea of the discourse between givers and takers, between producers and consumers, between creators and imitators, all of this, sort of these dichotomous relationships, are built on a relationship, and an exchange, if you will, an informational exchange, in which the product that's bought is an act informing an interest in the product itself. We don't think of consumption as filled with information because we're consumers, but the truth of the matter is what you buy means something. There's meaning in your consumption, right? So that the fact that I bought this pair of jeans rather than this pair of jeans, that data is potentially meaningful, and that data can be aggregated and analyzed and assessed to make determinations on my likelihood of buying any number of things. Similarly, in terms of creative actions, the act of creating something new itself, they say that imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So you see this a lot in comedic circles. A comedian or an artist will paint something and then someone will parody that imitation of the creative act, that imitation of the creative force is itself an act of generating or identifying something that was external to the person to begin with, right? If I never let it out, if I never disclose the creativity, well, there really can be no other there. So the artist who sits, this will become increasingly less likely to happen as we progress technologically, right? Because of any number of security and privacy concerns that individuals face. But the idea is, you can imagine an era, a foregone era where, and I forget the name of the author, I actually watched a video about this guy, I forget who it was, one of these authors. Published a few books, huge success, ridiculous success, spent the next 40 years of his life writing privately to himself, for himself. And you can recognize that even if the content of the information that he wrote privately for himself is later published, his intent was never to have it published. So you're really getting a sense of something here when someone writes to themselves, right? When they weren't in the midst of something that they intended to publish, and then they died. That's one thing. It's another thing to say that this was something written privately for self, never intended to be published, and was later published. Right? The ethics of that is neither here nor there. It would make good qualitative research with respect to maybe a social account of the rightness or wrongness, the morality of that act. Obviously, you can't interview the person because the person's dead, but you get the idea, right? In terms of this altruistic action, it's something that is done for others, right? So you were looking at any type of act that is done for others. The con of this, however, is that you can become self-denying. It can turn into nihilism. It can turn into entitlement. Nietzsche wrote a whole book on this, right? The whole idea of nihilism is buttressed in altruism. You don't become nihilistic, and I've lectured on this for 60 hours. So for me, there's nothing novel here. This might be novel for others. I had known this for a decade now, at least. But the idea is, you don't really relinquish faith. You don't really, in community, or for Nietzsche, in God, until you go through the altruistic mode of being in the world. It's only, according to Nietzsche, the process of immersing yourself through that responsibility for others, that altruism, right? The section is responsibility, to others. Responsibility to others, right? A responsibility to people that you recognize, well, this is exhausting. I've been doing a lot of work for forever, and no good is coming of it, and no good is likely to come of it, and you can regress into nihilism. It's good to read Nietzsche so that you don't do it, right? A whole continent basically regressed into nihilism, right? A whole host of people, not individual people, but peoples, a whole host of peoples, a whole host of countries regressed into nihilism. And that can be very problematic, right? So the idea is to recognize that despite the fact that I might have a responsibility to others, that responsibility to others can be perverted. That responsibility to others can itself collapse into something dark and potentially dangerous, right? So being able to gauge that is important. So here's a reference, and this is a direct quote from Kant. This is Kant's second formulation of his categorical imperative. And it says, act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. It is a very good secularist approach to altruism, right? It's a very good way to define altruism, right? The idea is when I am interacting with another person in terms of my assumed responsibility to others, I recognize that the responsibility is really reducible to not treat them as a means to getting something else, right? It's not to treat individuals like I might treat a hammer. To recognize that individuals have different temperaments and individuals have different levels of ability to, absorb stress and to be resilient and to be optimistic and to work and to be focused and to be, right? We all have, and I mean that seriously, right? Have a different sort of way to exist in terms of the to be. Individuals vary in that regard. So in terms of your relationships with your participant, in terms of your own self-care as a researcher, you have to recognize that that obligation to others can lead to, and I think I might talk about this later, maybe not, but that might, I'm surprised I actually didn't talk about it. Yeah, there's an actual concept for the collapse, the nihilistic collapse in many fields. So in terms of this responsibility to others, if it collapses, if altruism collapses, you might have an idea like donors fatigue, right? So in philanthropy circuits and philanthropic circuits, you have individuals who have amassed tremendous amounts of wealth, and they want to do social good with their wealth, which is great, which is a good thing. I pride myself the little bit that I'm able to contribute. I think I've done quite a bit for the little bit that I'm able to contribute. 3 iPads I've given away, a couple $100 to motivate graduate students, a couple $1,000 in building IGAR, and building that to where it needs to be, despite the fact that it was hacked. More money put into it to try and rebuild it. It might finally be dead. I'm not really sure how that's going to unfold. But the idea is, no, philanthropic donation, having actual money, not just like me philanthropically, this is my act of philanthropy, giving my education, it's what I have. But I've given money as well. You can imagine that, there's sick kids, give money for the sick kids. And, don't forget about the abused animals, okay, give money to that. Don't forget about genocidal atrocities, okay, you give money to that. And don't forget about the displaced domestic abused families, women and children, okay, you give money to that. There comes a point at which, once people recognize that you're the gal that cuts the checks, they're going to come to you repeatedly like, hey, give money to this and give money for that. And then you start to get fatigued. You recognize that no amount of wealth in the world, no amount of trillions of dollars, no amount of Google dollars is ever going to be able to pacify the world's crises. Money can't fix it. Money can help a lot of things, but just cutting a check and feeding... Yeah, I'm not telling you not to do this, right? The point is to do this. I do believe that we should contribute. I do believe in charity. But you can imagine that you would get the realization that, hey, last year I gave... Imagine that this person is uber wealthy, right? Last year I gave away $100 million, and I look at the news and nothing's changed with all the money that I gave. I gave away $100 million. Nothing's changed. You can see that it would collapse into fatigue, and this is the idea of donors fatigue, right, in terms of philanthropic circuits. So it would be cool, qualitative methodology. Again, yet another example, how the collapse of that altruism, the collapse of that altruistic act, not in terms of anything religious, obviously in terms of something secular, contextualized within philanthropy, and the collapse of that idealistic, that willingness to contribute the wealth to help others in donors fatigue, and ask uber wealthy people about their experience of donor fatigue. I have no idea of what that must be like. People might not be interested in talking to quote-unquote 1%ers because they're so bad and evil and they're the overlords or what have you. I think that's preposterous. I don't think you're the type of person that might think that. Maybe if you're a young enough graduate student. I have some really young graduate students working on their PhD. Much to my surprise, I have graduate students in their 23, 24. Insane. Already BA, MA, working on PhD. So yes, I can see if you're that young, you might be influenced. And I'm not talking about this graduate student specifically, but if you're in your very early 20s and you're completing a PhD, Occupy might have had a different effect on you than maybe it had on me. So I don't really buy into that whole 1%, 99% bit. I mean, I recognize economic disparity. Let's attack it via policy and legislation. Let's be real focused about it. But to demonize 1%ers, it's not a move I'm going to make. I don't believe in that, because I believe they got a ton of cash that people really, really need, and they could use that money to help. But the idea is, wouldn't that be a good qualitative methodology? Listen, to find these millionaires and billionaires and be like, hey, I want to do some research. I'm not interested in your money. I'm not hitting you up. I got your name from such and such philanthropic and I recognize that you gave a ton of money. Like, have you ever experienced fatigue? Do you ever feel that no amount of financial contribution is going to solve the world's problems, and how does that make you feel? Right? That's huge. That's huge. I want to hear that narrative. Right? I want to hear that narrative, so that this altruistic act isn't... There's a dark side to altruism, right? The idea that I hate, and it's a strong word, I hate cookie cookie-cutter, bite-sized intellectual blurbs. I hate blurb information. I'd rather not know than to know a blurb. I'd rather be ignorant than to know a blurb and act like I know. Altruism has a dark side. You can be exhausted, you can lose yourself, and you can end up denying the very thing that motivated you to give in the first place. Right? The idea is to find a balance. Right? There is a balance that each individual needs to find. Some people have a higher threshold so they can give more money, or they can work harder, or they can put in more hours, or they can sacrifice more of their physical body. Right? Some people can't do as much, but that's the beauty of the human experience, is that various individuals have various capacities, various thresholds, and it's the collective ability and the collective willingness to contribute that propels us forward. So, in terms of qualitative analysis, very sympathetic people and their ability to consider others in both their decision-making and their daily lives, be they teachers, clergy, social workers, etc., act altruistically, and I'll explain the quotes later once I get to the last part of this section, the next page. They act altruistically for those professionals who label their motivations altruistic. Understanding the process of internalizing and operationalizing that motivation would serve as a good analysis, qualitative analysis, right? I want to know the motivation. So if you go and you talk to a philanthropist, you say, why are you giving so much money? And she says, I'm really moved by this cause, and I have the means to do so, and so I'm going to support it. Well, okay, I understand that's the act. Remember what I said, it's not about the act, it's not about the donation. Like, what is it about you as a person? What is it about your wealth, as a person that makes you that type of person? That might be hard to pull off. I can imagine just getting access to that community is probably difficult. I don't know because I haven't tried, so I'm making an assumption. But I would imagine getting access to that community is probably a difficult thing to do. Not to discourage people, if you can do it, do it. And make great qualitative research. In terms of something that's more feasible, asking people whose profession is defined as altruism. And I think, barring medicine, it's education. I mean, you think altruism, you think doctors and nurses and teachers. Right? I mean, what I'm doing now is obviously altruistically. I already know this stuff. I've known this stuff for years. I've already read those books. I've already compiled the notes. I don't go back and watch my own videos. I might watch segments of, a little bit here or that, but I don't need to watch my own videos. I know this stuff, so this is not benefiting me. So yeah, it's altruistic in that regard. I put altruistic in quotes because I don't want people to think that this is all self-sacrifice and this is just, I'm going to eventually burn out and become a nihilist and, self-denying and self-defeating. No, because I'm more of this. I'll explain this in a little bit, right? Obviously, this act cannot be wholly egoistic. So it cannot be this. It cannot be wholly egoistic. Why? Because I recognize that the context in which the amount of effort I'm putting forward, the amount of work that I'm amassing, is not yielding sort of in karmic credits. There's a disproportionate relationship to the amount of work, and this is sort of the idea of systems functions theory and such, but the amount of work that I'm putting in, the amount of effort that I'm putting in, and the amount of benefit that I'm getting back from this system. If it were a strict work-benefit relationship, I should have already bowed out. These YouTube videos, this whole channel requires infinitely more work and effort on my part than it yields benefit to me. So it can't be this. It requires a tremendous amount of work on my part, but it yields a tremendous benefit to everyone else. So it is obviously altruistic. The idea is to identify what the benefits are, potentially, and I'll explain that in a bit. Okay, so we have an idea of this altruism. I want to make sure that I don't talk about altruism as sort of all-encompassing in sort of reverence to the deconstructivists. We're going to go to Foucault in the next section, and I'll stop the whole deconstructivist discourse. But with respect to Spivak and the application of Spivak to Derrida, I wanted to maintain sort of this destabilized, continually destabilized, almost amorphous discourse, which is a hard lecture to give to be loyal to the deconstructivist approach, because it isn't what I like, which is clearly defined stuff. There isn't this, well, 4 is sort of like this, and 2 is like this, and you can feel free to interplay But that's the model. The model requires that. So to do this lecture justice, I have to keep a lot of this sort of ambiguous and open to wide levels of interpretation, because for me to fix the interpretation and to create systems would be to do a disservice to the very system that I'm trying to explain. So I can't do that. Okay, so responsibility for others. Remember, feel free to collapse 2 and 4 together. What we're talking about is altruism for. So responsibility for others at a national level, national security is a responsibility for. Just like I have a responsibility, for my children on behalf of, as I gave the example before, I have a responsibility on behalf of my children for their protection, for their survival, for their health, for their well-being. So too, at a macro level, if you think paternalistically and people are going to like this or dislike this, what have you, I don't have a problem with it. I'm comforted by the belief. It might not be real, it might not actually be the case, but I am comforted at least by the belief that it's real. That, the nation, whatever abstraction it is, has my best interests at heart. It wants to see me flourish. It wants to put things in my path that will allow me to integrate it into myself and become better and make a contribution. I want to believe that. I have to believe that. The idea is, in terms of that responsibility for, on a macro level, it's huge. You can take it past the national and take it to the international level and think, the first thing that comes into my mind is Mother Teresa, right? Her drive was key, was definitive. It was motivated by religion, and as such, despite the fact that it's the first thing that comes into my mind, I have an obligation not to really sort of privilege that motivation, because it was a transcendental motivation, and the very fact that it's situated in religion makes it contentious. And the idea is not to make it contentious. It's also not to disrespect or disregard her motivation and her beliefs for her doing so much good, but the idea is to try and find a mechanism in which that same amount of good could potentially be accomplished without belief in anything other than human beings. It's hard to do. I'm trying to tell you, it's hard as hell to do. It's hard to find individuals who are willing to work on behalf of a greater social good and make no appeal to religion. There are very few people that I know of. There's very, very few, right? The people who make no religious appeals tend, not always, they tend to be very, very sort of egoistic in their predisposition. They assume a Hobbesian stance in the world. Psychological egoism, intellectual dominance, economic dominance, power, control. That's it. That's the end of the game for a lot of people. I know infinitely many academics, really, really nice people, but the idea is there's always that preservation of contention, right? I'm at the university, insert name, I know so-and-so, I was invited to party XYZ, I'm on the guest list for ... name droppers, these are the people who are in the know. And I'm not knocking that, that's a way of being in the world, but you have to recognize that that mode, while it will build you as an individual into a powerhouse, doesn't do much good for everyone else. Granted, you could be in that position and then make key decisions that affect others, but I would like people in those positions who are both deliberative about self and other. It would be interesting and cool to see if people can do it without making appeals to religion. Not to try and say that let's get rid of religion, but there has to be there's no social movement for social... the only movement I can actually think of, barring maybe PETA, would be this new sort of, ecological movement. I think a lot of the ecological movement and sort of earth-mindedness and sustainability stuff is pagan. It's a real pagan sort of justification. People won't espouse this, right? They probably will never acknowledge this because they view it as being something bad and evil. But I don't mean pagan in that sense, right? It's just not religious. It's not transcendental. It's, properly speaking, not even spiritual. It's just a respect of being a caretaker. It really is the idea with respect to this responsibility for others at its macro level independent to discourses of God. I think the new sort of sustainability, eco-consciousness movement is it's on the vanguard. It's doing the new thing, where you can talk about a profound responsibility to assume ownership and become a proper caretaker for the thing that sustains us, which is the freaking planet. Like, why would you want to shoot yourself in the foot, right? And also, I don't believe, and I also, to take even a step further, I don't believe that, capitalist and eco-conscious people can't sit at the same table. I gave you an example of Walmart. It's a trivial example, but I don't believe that, well, it's inherently the case that, sort of from a lobbyist policy-based initiative, that the business community is in one group and all the tree huggers are in another group, and never the paths of the two, never shall they meet, right? Never shall they cross. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that that's a generalization of both communities. So that the idea is we can assume a responsibility for others, and if you're motivated to do good because of your belief in God, then more power to you. I cannot tell you how much infinite respect I have for this new Pope. I cannot tell you. And if I was to profess a religious faith formulaically and blah, 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 I would be like, yo, shout out to the Catholics. I mean, the dude's top shelf. I mean, his actions are speaking louder than any amount of papal decrees that he could issue in his lifetime. It's not about what he's saying, it's about what the dude's doing. And, so shout out to the Pope, and I'm not even Catholic. But the idea is there's a respect that we have, collectively, socially, for his message and what we've seen him do. The idea is it the case that the only way to do that is if you profess faith, if you become Catholic? Well, if that's the case, well, then become Catholic and do some good in the world. If it's not the case, then figure out how to do that. And one way that you might do this is to talk to Catholics, talk to Muslims who do good in the world, talk to Christians who do good in the world, and take their motivation. Obviously, their motivation is divine. Sort of get rid of their motivation, no disrespect to their motivation, and find how their motivation informs their actions. If you can distill something that can be applied to those who don't have faith, then take something from the religious community and give it to the secular community. And now what does the secular community think? Oh my goodness, I didn't think we could learn something from believers. Look at that. We're all in this together. Let's make sense of this. Now, this might be complicated in Judeo-Christian terms because of domination over the earth. I mean, so we might not be able to eat at the same table. There might be some inherent incremental conflict ideologically in aspects of Genesis, the book Genesis, and the eco-conscious movement. We might not be able to see eye to eye at all. But, I'm not a religious theologian, so I don't know how that could be reworked in order to accommodate a more sustainable life, a more sustainable environment and such. But the idea is at least to make the effort, right? The older I get is the more I realize, not that I want to see people sitting at a table roasting marshmallows, because I'm not delusional. Everybody has their delusions, but that's ridiculous. That's never going to, it's stupid to even waste your time trying to, but I mean, come on, you can't tell me that I can't learn from somebody who has a belief that I don't share. You can't tell me that I can't, I know you can. There's knowledge to be gained from everywhere. One quick side note before I go on to the next part. When I posted Kant, I think I did Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, or the groundwork for metaphysics. I forget which one I did. But I did a Kant bit. And another black guy on YouTube, I know he was a black guy, he hits me up on the text or the email. I don't read my YouTube email anymore. I just got tired of all the negative crap. So when I was reading my emails and responding to my emails, he, in the post, in the comments, he was like, how could you as a black guy be doing Kant? And I'm thinking, because Kant was a racist, you're not going to read Kant because he was a racist? Because you're an atheist, you're not going to look to what Christians are doing, or what Catholics are doing, or what Jews are doing, because they're stupid just de facto? There's nothing good that you can learn from these people because you're an atheist, and vice versa. I could never learn anything from an atheist because I'm a believer? No. People got different ways of being in the world. Granted, their motivations will be different. And you might not be able to actualize or put put any weight in their motivations, but the consequence of their motivations and how their motivations inform their social acts, assuming that those social acts are acts of good and acts that contribute to social betterment, why would you not? Why wouldn't you? Right? Why wouldn't you look to their mode of being in the world so that you too could do some good? That's the idea. I think it would be a genius study to take from the religious community, not in a pejorative sense, the sort of take, but to borrow or to integrate from the religious community, diverse religious community, those modalities that allow them collectively to do so much social good, and to see if you could secularize it so that it's not obviously the case that, well, yes, we know that there's a lot of bad that comes from religion, but there's a tremendous amount of good that comes from religion of all types. Well, the good that comes from religion of all types, what is it about that structure? There's a structure to it. Let me see if I can make sense of this and secularize it and give it to atheists and agnostics so that they can do good as well, right? So that they can have meaning, they can have purpose, they can have community, they can have identity, they can have kinship, they can have the benefits of what you have without all of the transcendental motivations. Why not? Right? Why aren't people doing this work? I mean, seriously, why aren't graduate students doing it? It's beyond me, right? It should be done. It should be done. So 7.3, and again, not to discredit or say, just an alternative approach. I don't believe that we live in a world where one thing is going to remain true forever. I believe we live in a pluralistic society. It's and I'll move on, but I think it's important to say, it's exactly the same thing as like sex education in K through 12. I believe that kids are going to be fucking, right? And I think insofar as kids are having sexual intercourse, we have an obligation to make sure that they're protected and that they protect themselves. Now, I also recognize parents have their own beliefs, and parents are going to ultimately make the decision for their kids. But in terms of a public service, public health sort of approach, no. The idea that you don't want to provide kids, adolescents under 18 with prophylactics and condoms is not going to stop the fact that they're going to be having unprotected sex without them. The fact that you believe that Christians and Muslims and Jews and their religious beliefs are the cause for all of, or if not most of, the bad that happens in this world, the ignorance that happens in this world, the disbelief and the violence and the perpetual war in this world does not mean, first of all, you would have to justify that if you believe that, does not mean that there isn't good. Does not mean that you can't still go to those systems of belief for your own guidance. They're going to continue to war. They're going to continue to fight. That's going to continue to happen. Kids are going to continue to fuck each other. They're going to continue to have sex. Why not give them some condoms? They're going to continue to fight. They're going to continue to war. Why not learn from the bits that they do good and do more good with that? Right? So that the idea is, no, we can learn from everybody. You can learn from everybody. Right? There's something to learn from everybody. So I want to read this quote. Quote, this is 7.3, bottom of page 12. Is there any difference between killing a man with a stick and with a sword? The king said, there is no difference. Is there any difference in doing it with a sword and with a style of government? Again, there is no difference, was the reply. Mencius then said, in your kitchen there is fat meat. In your stables there are fat horses, well-fed horses. But your people have a look of hunger. And on the walls there are those who have died of famine. This is leading the beasts to devour men. The idea is, clearly this is like par excellence, pre-Galtung structural violence. That's what this really is a passage of. So if you love structural violence, which is like up there with Marx for me, I've heard enough of it. But it is a good theoretical paradigm. It's not to knock it. It's just so overused. This is a good way to talk about structural violence because that's what Mencius is talking about, right? It's talking about structural violence. But not only is he talking about structural violence, it's the responsibility for others has been lost. When the government loses that responsibility, when the government becomes nihilistic as a consequence of its fatigue, if you will, what is to happen to all of us? You have to think about Stalin and the kulaks, right? You have to think about sort of the systematized, organized, structured. So here's the irony, right? The irony is all of the technical checking to make sure, and interruptions and all that other stuff. So but I was checking because I was pushing the battery. I wanted to push the battery to its limit, just so I can get a sense of how far the battery could go. I'm absolutely amazed. First of all, I'm going to do a shameless plug. They're not paying me, but they're not paying me. So what is this? Rayovac Rechargeable Plus batteries. I got 2.5 hours of continuous video recording out of these batteries. Freaking amazing. These batteries are insane. But I wanted to push the batteries as far as I could push it to see what I could get out of it. I got 2.5 hours out of it. I ended up losing a bit of content, and for that I apologize. But the idea is this. I was reading the passage here. I'm not going to reread it again. This is 7:3. And I was applying that passage, which is on Mencios and a form of government that has lost its hope, not our hope, its hope in the people. Because the idea is we always think about hope, you hear the campaigns and all the politicians put on shiny suits, everybody gets all guys smiling, super happy, and have hope, have hope, have hope, it'll get better, it'll get better, it'll get better. And you're like, yeah, it sucks, but okay, sure, no problem, I'll have hope. The point is, hope is bidirectional. It's a dialectic. It's not unidirectional. Y'all have hope in us as well. Don't give up on us. And what happens in this chapter, in this section, in this quote, is that the political establishment has lost hope in the people. That's a really bad situation. First of all, it's the condition for, one of the conditions for revolution and a loss of political power. But it's not that, times are tough, and I know milk is high, and I know gas is high, and I know you can't find a job, and I know your benefits are going to be cut out, soon, and I know you can't feed your kids, and I know your disabilities are getting cut, and I know, your hours are working, and I know you haven't been unemployed, and I know you can't find a job, but have hope. Okay, we're tough, we'll have hope. Don't forget to have hope in us. Don't forget that your job is to maintain an ability for us to survive, to be able to see the next day. Don't lose hope in us. Because once the political establishment loses hope in its people, the people become a nuisance. The people become an irritant. The masses become, they become distractions and detractors. So what do? You implement a genocidal campaign. You start killing them off. It'd be better if they weren't here. Or at least less of them, So you start systematizing the extermination of your people, but you're not going to do that for yourself and for your clique and for your friends and all that. So your horses are well fed and people are dying. And your stables are packed. And you yourself, you're swollen. You're bloated. And everybody else is dying. Why is that happening? It's because you don't believe in the people. You've lost hope. The idea is hope is bidirectional, right? You have to have hope in I believe you have to have hope in your government, right? Whatever your government could be or should be or what have you. Especially if we're talking in the secularist account, right? If there is no God, then all you got is your government. And if that, for whatever reason, isn't working out, then, all's for naught. But the idea is, no, have hope in your government. But tell your government to have hope in me. Have hope in us. Have hope that we're going through a phase. This recession will pass, we'll make money, we'll go back to being a superpower. Oh, we're not going to be defeated, we're not going to be weak, we're not going to always be told and dictated to, and soon we'll be independent, and soon we'll be free, and soon we'll be sovereign. Either way, fine. I'm for all of that. But the idea is, it's directed outside of the individual. It's not about self. Right? To have hope is to immediately externalize it. You can't have hope and manifest that hope in yourself, but we're not quite there yet, right? So the idea is for there to be, the thing I love about this citation from the book of Mencius is the realization that the King Hue at the time is just completely jaded. It reminds me a lot of Stalin, sort of that personality type, very Stalinistic, right? It's sort of jaded and indifferent to the mass collective suffering of others, and a perversion a perversion of all perversions, wherein the individual establishment interprets the suffering of people as an annoyance, interprets the plight of people's, suffering and their ailment, their poverty, their lack of education, their ignorance as an annoyance. And rather than seeking to address that, they fall nihilistic. They cannot be helped. They can't be helped. Now, granted, I'm smart enough to recognize there's a statistical fact in assuming a market capitalist economy that a portion of the population is inevitably going to be impoverished. I'm not saying duh, like I get it, right? But you don't have to go freaking North Korea with it, right? It's one thing to say a statistical fact that a portion of the population is going to be impoverished. Sure. North Korea attributes a valuation to that, not in terms of impoverishment, but there's a certain percentage of the population that's inherently going to be the enemy. We don't need to make poverty the enemy. There's a portion of the population that's going to be impoverished. This is a statistical fact because we are a market capital economy, and I think being capitalistic is good. Thus, we have to accept some of the bad because we're a capitalist economy. But shouldn't we at least try to make that population small as possible, not as big as possible? Right? Don't we want the population that is impoverished to be less and less, if for no other reason than the straight egoistic desire to generate more revenue from middle-class tax dollars? The more of them that got jobs, the more taxes they pay. The more taxes they pay is the more that we establish the structure that has made us who we are. Right? So don't we want to incentivize them from not being that impoverished? We need to, and there's a middle ground, right? There's a middle ground. I said in the previous discussion, I think the conservatives have a really good argument. How long is too long? I think Democrats and liberals have a really good argument. We have a social obligation. This is why I'm not in that position to make practical policy-based decisions, because it's very difficult, right? You have to do test pilots, you have to try some stuff out, some stuff will work and some stuff won't. But the fact that there is even an attempt to try shows that our government, now I'm talking specifically about the United States, is still interested. They still have hope for us, collectively. So whatever they figure out, they'll figure it out, it'll be fine. If there wasn't any discussion on it at all, no one's doing anything on it at all, or everything that's being done and everything that's being passed is to further expand that class of poverty so that poverty is the new norm, and it's not, the 99.1% is realized because there is no middle class, wow, that's a whole different story. Right? The 99.1% is already a myth because we have a middle class in the United States of America. It's a shrinking middle class, but we have one. We have one. The wealth have loopholes that they implement and business communities implement in order to forego tax accountability. The poor have under-the-table jobs, or they're not reporting taxes, and thus it's people like myself who assume the burden to keep the system going. But it's something that I do with pride. I take pride in the fact that I'm able to do that. I take comfort in the fact that knowing that I made my contribution to this whole system, right? So that the idea is that that concept of hope is bidirectional. In terms of fatigue, you can imagine that the hero would eventually get fatigued too. I was in teaching for a long, long time, and I just got burnt out, so I just quit. Identifying, that would be a phenomenon. The phenomenon would be teacher burnout or burning out. Something that, I don't know, I'm just not built for, I can do this forever. No matter how bad or how stressful it gets, this isn't work for me. This is therapy. All of this is therapeutic for me. I love it. I love it. But I would imagine for other people it's not like that because they don't have the same independence with respect to time. They have to be there. I want to be here. Two totally different motivations. Same function, education, but what you're witnessing isn't a function of a necessity as much as it is a function of my desire. I'm indulging now. Whereas I would imagine a classroom teacher, doing the job for 3-4 years, having to do the job, not wanting to do the job out of any number of social decisions that were made. Oh my goodness, that burnout is real. Getting a phenomenological account of what that burnout is like and the conditions that led to that burnout and when the person realized right? It might have been, you know, sort of pre-planned and I'm not coming back in the fall, or it might have been as you know, sort of emphatic as, oh, I'm gonna quit right now. Like I'm to call the assistant principal and the principal, call the guidance counselor. I need somebody to cover for my class because I'm quitting now. I can't do this. Any number of things could be at stake, and the idea is to try and make a sense of what that might be, and it could be fatigue, right? Giving perpetually to others could drain you to the point which there's nothing left for yourself in this. You collapse into fatigue and you sort of bow out of the game. The idea is to offer those who could otherwise be fatigued, become fatigued, but also be really good educators if they stuck in it, the conceptual tools to cope. Just like someone copes with addiction or copes with survival, right? There's guilt, survivor's guilt as well. That's also in this group. So too, do we need to be able to cope with educational fatigue, right? It can be taxing. The idea is it won't be a problem for me per se because I don't have to be here. I want to be here, and me being here is me indulging. This is really me getting my kicks off, which is why I've spent 2 hours and 40 minutes on one section. Granted, this section was way too long, but it was very important for me to talk about sort of a very grand discourse on responsibility in general, right? More so than just heroism, though that is a great sort of indication of responsibility, but responsibility as such, because I think it's what motivates all the good that's in the world. So, for example, caregivers, caregiving, breadwinners in a depressed economy, etc., etc., the commitment and certain sacrifices. I talked about this earlier, but it's the first time I'm saying it now. Sacrifice, I erased it, but sacrifice is a consequence from the responsibility. You have the call, you know that the call is going to require a certain level of responsibility. That level of responsibility is going to require and necessitate sacrifice. You cannot have responsibility without sacrifice. You cannot. Thus, there'll be that discomfort. There'll be that sort of distress as a consequence of, damn, you know, I'm not going to be able to go to the party. I'm not going to be able to be that guy, be that gal, get those shoes, get that car, have these friends, meet this person, have that conversation. I have to do stuff. I have to obligate myself. I have to do the right thing. Opportunity, and thus we sort of progress. The idea is that is a great quality. I don't know if other people. I mean, I'm sure other people do. It's my favorite quality in a person. I love responsible people. They don't do things that they ought not to do. And I mean, granted, we're human, so we make error. But it means in terms of sort of social. Sort of their social function, not their personal function as much. In terms of their social function, they recognize always already that the second they leave the house, it's me functioning for the betterment of others, but it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to result in this sort of self-denial, nihilistic worldview, wherein I've given as much as I can give, and now I recognize it's all for naught. It doesn't have to be that way, right? The idea of fatigue, in terms of donor fatigue, is that fatigue passes. Right? Your muscles are sore, it hurts, you overexerted yourself. Rest for a little bit. Every individual is going to determine what rest means for him or her. Rest for a little bit. Take a nap, sleep. You know, go out to the club, talk to friends, play some Xbox, what have you. But once we recognize that fatigue is inherently transitory, then there's a possibility for a rejoinder, right? There's a possibility to be reacclimated into the community of giving to others. Such that it's not just, I hate in American politics now, they got this, and it's pervasive, and I hate it. They've got this givers-takers, sort of really sort of banal, absolutely not biconditional, binary opposition. Right? They have this really banal binary opposition. You got a lot of this was rooted in Romney, who I'm sure is a great guy as a person, but what he said was just detestable. Right? 47% of them, they're takers. As if people, you know, they pride themselves in being takers. Like, you know, this is the North Korea move, right? To look at poverty and then to demonize people because they need. No, there are people who exploit and weaken via a good conservative approach, construct rules that would prevent gaming the system, right? I've done lecture series in terms of sort of free riding and such. There's a benefit benefit effort ratio. Make benefit effort distinctions. You've been on this thing for this long. You've had this. You haven't produced that. Therefore, sorry, no, don't pass go. Sure, let's implement some new stuff. Satisfy conservative intent, which I think is just, that the system isn't gamed perpetually. There's nothing wrong with that. That's legit. But also, don't make the move that because people need, they're bad and they're takers. Because then that starts to sound like North Korea. And the move after that is internment and death camps. And it's not that far. And I recognize my position. I know I'm a professor, and that people who don't have my credentials will appeal to what I said, so let me contextualize that. I mean that. I mean that. This isn't like the hocus pocus boogeyman story. This is real. We interned our own people in the internment of Japanese Americans because our political establishment gave up hope that Japanese Americans weren't here to usurp governmental power. Don't think that it can't happen again. The idea is stop with all the back and forth, stop with the sort of binary opposition, and recognize that it sucks that people need, but to demonize them as being takers, that might apply, and probably absolutely does apply, to a small percentage of people who are in fact gaming the system. But don't think that it's just the poor that are gaming the system. I'm not going to talk about, the fact that Mitt Romney, because I don't get political here, but the fact that I think it's ironic, the fact that people talk about sort of this gaming of the system. I mean, Medicare fraud is huge, right? Medicare fraud is huge. And people game the system. And I'm sure there's federal agents galore on the case, accountants, I don't know if they have sort of forensic, I do know the phrase, forensic accountant, I think is a real job description. You're gaming the system so that you can get medical benefits and then, medical benefits, payoffs, kickbacks from Uncle Sam, and you think that's not taxing on the system as well? It's not just the poor that are takers. It's obscene to think that. It's unfair. It's unfair. It's unfair, and it's mean-spirited to say that it's just poor people who are takers. There's a whole bunch of millionaires and maybe even billionaires who've amassed some of their wealth from gaming Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam, some of us are willing to fight for you, sir. Everybody else wants to game. But the idea is, it's not just poor people. It's not poor people just gaming. There's a lot of affluent, super, uber wealthy people who got a good substantial portion of their wealth from fucking over Uncle Sam. And I don't apologize for the language, right? So the idea is not to demonize the community, because that really starts to sound like North Korea, right? That really is, segment of the population is inherently anti-establishment and thus a threat to the sovereignty. No. A statistical fact, a certain part of our population is going to be impoverished as a consequence of us being a capitalistic system, but capitalism is more important than the ridiculously utopist, unrealizable goal of eradicating absolute poverty. It's not going to happen. So liberals, that's the critique of liberals. Liberals, I'm more on the conservative bent on that. That's a complete farce goal. Don't even set the eradication of poverty as a goal. It's laughable. You would have to transform capital or discard capital. You have to know sort of what you're doing here. So in terms of that relationship, we need to recognize, and a good qualitative methodology would attempt to articulate the conditions in which this might occur. So anybody who's doing political science PhD, this is perfect. This is perfect. Qualitative methodology, right? Obviously it's content-based. We're not talking about participants. You're looking at data. You're looking at, this might be mixed method maybe in some regard. You're looking at, news clippings. You're looking at sort of social commentary from our political leaders. This is stuff that pundits are talking about right now on television, like now. So it's obviously good grounds, fertile ground for qualitative, and it's obviously qualitative methodology. It's because it's interpretational, right? Because it's interpretational. This might even be good IR, international relations. How are we going to be a good global partner if we are treating our own people the way we're treating? Why would I want to invite you into my community to do business, to have interaction with my people, when you're treating your people like that? This is how you talk about your people. You're talking about your own people as takers. Why in the world would I want to do business with you if you talk about your own folks like that, right? So the idea is this is good IR, international relations PhD, right? There's the truth of the matter is not to demonize the political establishment, since obviously the citation refers to the government and the political establishment, which is why we got here from this reference. The idea is not to demonize the community as much as it is to recognize that their function is really to make decisions and pass law. It's almost exclusively about policy, legislation. Regulation is more at the sort of municipality level. I sort of perceive the overarching function of the federal system as grand scale legislative regulation. It really is. It's like legislative regulation basically is what it does. Overwhelmingly. You can look at executive, it's really legislative. You can look at legislative, it's legislative. The judicial, it's legislative. It really is all legislative, right? It's some various degrees of, or various aspects or nuances of legislative regulation, but that's what it is. That's what it is. Legislative regulation is socially constructed. Who does social construction? Qualitative researchers. That's what we do. So we can transform the law by talking about new ways to perceive people. We can transform the law by showing statistical facts in which other countries had a different interpretation of their poverty population and transformed their community in this way. A recognition that, and not to knock liberals, but and also to benefit liberals now, that regulation in terms of economic and business regulation is important so that we don't have gaming of the system in terms of kickouts and handbacks from Medicare fraud and business, sort of illicit business practices and such. So there's ground that can be made, common ground that can be sort of forged, right? So how they cope with demand, stresses, the sense of obligations, etc. would constitute good qualitative analysis. And then lastly, on page 13, to end this ridiculously long section, but I knew this section was going to be long because it's like 4 or 5 pages in depth, each page having multiple lines and multiple references, multiple citations. It's supposed to be deep because this is what I do. In the a la carte model of education, I offer the 5, 6, 7, 8 course meal, not the grab and go. You can't take this meal and walk with it and eat. You got to sit down and prepare yourself for this meal. It's quite a bit, and I know it is, but that's what I want it to be. So responsibility to self, for self, as other. It's both. I recognize that I'm doing this for me, but I'm doing this for those like me. I objectify myself, right? The young, displaced, disillusioned academic, doesn't have to be black, doesn't have to be man. The young, displaced academic who is idealistic in his or her predispositions and who wants to make a social change but doesn't know how to go about doing that. Has the work ethic and the dedication and the intent and the motivation to do it and is trying to figure it out. The idea is you can be altruistic without exhausting yourself. You can be egoistic without being ashamed of yourself. So the idea is neither to be exhausted nor to be ashamed. And to find that common ground is easier said than done, right? I am absolutely not ashamed of who I am. I am absolutely not ashamed of the fact that I am Dr. Jason J. Campbell, because you better believe I start every single one of these videos off with, "Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell," right? No, I am a professor. I have earned a PhD. I got the job. I teach at a university. It's not a bragging, it's a fact of my life. It's not to say, "Oh, look how great I am." It's a fact. I got multiple job offers before I even graduated from college. I was still in school, right? And the day I literally had the degree conferred, I got the job. So, no, it's not, "Wow, I'm so great. Oh, look at, well, you should be more, shame on you. Shame, you're too proud." No, I'm proud. I worked hard for this. I earned this. Similarly, you as a researcher, you need to think to yourself, I put in the effort, I put in the time, I organized all the interviews, I sat down and talked to all these participants, I transcribed all of these notes, I put in all the effort to make sense, and no one, my committee, no one is going to deny me my interpretation. Can you imagine? This would make a great freaking fiction. Graduate student goes through, does all this work, 2-3 years worth of research. Let's say it's an ethnography, tons of data collection, transcription of infinite amounts of notes. Let's even say it's a translation. So it's the translation, then the transcription of all the notes. then you take what you've identified, you bring your theory to your committee members, and your committee members laugh you off. They say, oh, well, no, that's, that doesn't appeal to the paradigm because, it's got to be this author and blah, 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 blah. And you feel like, okay, I can do the song and dance and just write a cookie-cutter dissertation to make them happy so I can get out of school, but what about my authenticity? What about all this work that I put in? That's the time when you become proud. That's the time when you become irreverent. That's the time when you refuse to bow. No, you don't understand. I want, committee members, I want you to know that I will escalate this as high as it needs to go. I'm not changing what I've done. Right? This isn't like the inchoate phase where I'm trying to figure out who I am as a researcher. I collected the data. I talked to the people. I was on the plane. I slept in the hotels. I ate the shit food. I've collected everything that needs to be collected, and this is my interpretation. This is my finding, and this is how I want to contextualize it, as justified by the content information. The genius of a PhD defense, and the best compliment I ever had, I'll give you the other side as well. The best compliment I had was from one of my chairs. After I've defended my PhD defense, he pulled me aside and he said, it wasn't necessarily private. He said, Jason, that was a defense. That was a defense. Because, I had hard questions. Why isn't civil war like a genocide? It was sort of a difficult question, right? It would seem for all practical purposes that a civil war is a genocide. Explain it. Oh, I'm not going to bow. I'm not going to cower. No, it's this. And I had, you should have seen it. I had a picture of it. I've lost it since, digital pictures. A stack of reams of books that I had read, each noted with like page numbers. So that when they asked me the questions, I sort of had an idea of all the types of questions that could be asked. And I created a list in order to navigate immediately. That question is in typology class this, and that answer is in book this. So every time, this is absolutely true. Any of my professors will attest to this. Every time they asked me a question, I was able, because I'm that type of dude, I was able to actually locate a page in another author's text and respond to their question by reading for every question that I got. So why isn't the Civil War like genocide? Oh, as a matter of fact, that's so-and-so. Here, read this explanation, interpretation. You think I'm going to have someone deny me my interpretation? That's the time to be proud. That's the time not to be ashamed. That's the time to appeal to ego. But if that's all you have, if all you have at the end of the day is your credentials, if all you have at the end of the day is your fame and your celebrity and a billfold with billions of dollars in it, if that's all you have at the end of the day, then it might make you happy and it might be good for a party of one. But you have not contributed to this thing called life for us at all. You have to give back. You have to do something. Call it paying it forward. Sure. Call it philanthropy. Fine. Call it whatever you want to call it, but recognize that it's not just about you, which is why I spend so much time doing this. Right? No, my ego motivates and it justifies, and my credentials and my work ethics and my experience and my mania justifies all of this, but I don't keep it for myself. It's no fun if I keep it for myself. Right? No, give it out to everybody else. Run with it. Set the bar, which is what I do. Set the bar. This is, if you're doing qualitative research and you want to give back, and, Dr. Campbell says to do it, man. Look at what he did. He compiled all these notes. Watch the video. I like this section, this page right here, da-da-da. Yeah, you're appealing to me, but the idea is it doesn't stop with me. I become, and I'm willingly allowing myself, unlike sort of in a negative sense, in violation of Kant's second formulation of the categorical imperative, I'm willingly allowing myself. It's like the role of prostitution. I love this idea, right? A good counterexample to Kant is the prostitute. You ask yourself, male or female? Well, isn't the prostitute a perfect example that of the absurdity of Kant's second formulation? Because you literally use the prostitute as a means to sexual climax? No, the prostitute understands that you're using him or her as a means to sexual climax and is more than willing to function as that means. I recognize that you're using me as a means to do the dirty work. Dr. Campbell's going to go do the research, find all the crap. I can just buy the books, look at his stuff, and then formulate he's doing a lot of the labor, right? It's not that I'm doing the thinking, I'm just doing a lot of the labor and a lot of the interpretive account. Now what you have is something that's absolutely beautiful. You have it there before you so that you can critically analyze without having to exert a lot of labor, which is really the goal, right? You have before you the buffet, and you now can critically analyze without having to spend the time to locate this little gem and this little gem and then make the connection. Dr. Campbell located this citation from Campbell that talks about the call, and this citation in Spivak that talks about the call, both within the context of a responsibility. So clearly it's accurate. There's really no interpretation in it. That's just sort of fact, so syntactic fact. Now I can, let me go back and reread the context we just said. I don't have to do the effort to locate that. I've already done it for you. I've already synthesized it for you in terms of bringing a logical link. Now you can do a more complex interpretive model, because you read so-and-so who talked about the call as well. Now you have two conceptual links with citation reference, with my interpretation of that, with your own reading, with your own interpretation. Oh my goodness, come on now. Now we're talking. That's knowledge. Now we're talking. That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. So let me read this quote from Campbell. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own experience. Where we had thought to travel outward, we've come to the center of our own experience. It's both. It's not just the center and it's not just outward. Right? Just now reading this, where I thought, just now channeling Joseph Campbell through this lecture, real time, where I thought that I was giving you a good, I remember what initially motivated me. And it was about me. It wasn't about you at all. It's not until I'm presented, and this won't make sense. It can't make sense for most of you, if not all of you. While you are reaping the benefits of this, I initially wasn't intended. I completely forgot why I came here. But this helped both of us, right? You get something, I get something. Right? This is symbiotic for me. This isn't parasitic in any sense. This is symbiotic. You get a benefit, but I get a benefit. I'm not where I was before. I have transformed. And as a product of my real-time observable transformation, you got a whole host of goodies. Right? You got stuff that you can pull from to motivate your qualitative analysis. I recognize this is now 3 hours, this section. I know that that's obscene to have one section that's 3 hours. I know the likelihood that people are going to sit through and watch, especially this lecture series, or even this section in its totality is limited. I might get, 100 people, 150 people, but I'm not doing it for the world. I'm doing this for the people who are serious, right? I'm doing it for the 300. I'm keeping this 300. I don't want people who want to be artisans and figure skaters, and I want people who want to be qualitative methodologists. I want people who want to use social scientific research to change how we interpret the world for the better. Those are the people that I want. And if I got 300 people that are like that, then my 300 people are better than someone who has 10,000 views and people are just sort of passively going by. It's supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be arduous. It's supposed to be painful. It's supposed to be a drag, to put it like, it's supposed to be that. It's supposed to be, no way. Why? Because anybody who would sit through this is real. And these are the people that I'm working for. Anybody who would stay in tune is real. And you are the reason why I'm here. What you need to recognize is your obligation to both your participants and your research. But not just your participants and not just your research. You have to fight. You have a responsibility not to be ashamed of your interpretation. Right? Don't allow your committees and the knowledge that they have to dissuade you that what you know is an accurate interpretation is accurate. Don't allow that to happen. Fight for what you believe in. If you fight the good fight and recognize that for whatever institutional bureaucracy I can't espouse this interpretation in my dissertation, play the game, get your PhD, go on, publish books, and then do what you want to do. But the idea is do that after you've fought. Do that after you've put your interpretation out there. Because I'm telling you, people want to read your interpretations. The link between Spivak and Campbell, I don't know that anybody else has done it. This is not the greatest association. I do way more complex stuff than that. But the idea is, that association is a consequence of just the sheer willingness to continue to read, right? If you're not reading, you're really not doing this stuff. So, you got to be committed to that as well. 2 more points and then we're done. Reference. Genuine charity demands sacrifice. Again, right? Part of this hero character, part of this responsible individual is an individual that's willing to sacrifice, right? Not to sacrifice to the point of nihilism, not to sacrifice to the point of self-destruction or suicide or homicide, right? Not to sacrifice to the point of psychological breakdown or meltdown, but to sacrifice things that people don't want to sacrifice. Why? Because they're doing it for the collective good, right? For the good of the species. It is hard. This is a direct quote. This is a direct quote from my dog. Genuine charity demands sacrifice for the good of the species. It is hard. It's full of self-overcoming because it needs human sacrifice. Not in terms of blood, in terms of time, effort, peace of mind, associations, distractions. It requires that, and if you're built for this, you can be a huge force for good, right? Qualitative application. Lastly, the application of Spivak's notion of outside-inside, sort of marginalization from within the center, with reference to education can be applied to anything, and I've done many applications in the previous video. How do professional minorities overcome their unique positions to serve would be a good service qualitative analysis. Now that I've progressed 3+ hours plus maybe 2.5 hours from the last section, that is a really trivial point to end. We're so far beyond that. The idea of marginalization from within the center is deep. It requires that we are perpetually in a state of sympathizing and, if possible, empathizing with the plight of others. Recognition that, it's not about the act. It's not about, oh, look, Dr. Campbell is clearly sacrificed a lot. He's clearly socially minded because all the videos. Of course I am. I mean, that's why I do it for myself. I can see my work. But it's not about running in the building, and, despite the fact that it's collapsing or there's fire. That's important, but let's leave that for the journalists. It's everything else that led up to the individual being the type of individual that would assume such an overwhelming amount of sacrifice and not break and not fall victim to nihilism, would not fall victim to egoism, right? To have that balance. The real balance in life isn't sort of this Eastern state of passivity and translucence. I don't believe that balance is that. I believe some instances of balance might rest in that. But when you think balance, you think of the monk meditating with the sunset, on his face is probably a guy. Yeah, I get that. But the idea, you also need to do some stuff, right? You got to get up and do some stuff, right? Jump up, get mad, kick a door down, yell, argue with somebody, have a fight, laugh, have sex, get drunk, drink too much, don't drink enough, sleep, don't sleep, live life, right? Be a human being, but do a little bit of everything, right? Be socially minded enough to recognize, and this is how I'm going to end it, be socially minded enough to recognize that there is no society without you. Period. Period. So, with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.